Chapter 30-39. That's exactly what I was thinking. Yi Shiwen nodded and said. Things had already come to this point. It would be unreasonable not to go and take a seat. He had nothing to worry about in the Constellation sect. However, Sun Si Wang would still have to stay in the Constellation sect for a long time. If he had the care of the Constellation sect's headmaster, then his future life would be smoother. That's great. Star Emperor nodded. If it was not necessary, he did not want to become enemies with Yi Shiwen. He could completely ignore the Emperor, but he could not ignore the top masters of the same level. Martial Emperor, please come with me, Star Emperor said, and his figure had already broken through the sky. Yi Shiwen also followed closely behind. The two did not stop at the Constellation sect, but directly entered the Constellation sect. The Constellation sect's myriad stars temple was like being in the midst of stars. Countless stars were condensed, and most of the star power absorbed was projected here. Yi Shiwen and Star Emperor sat on two cloud beds, facing each other. Yi Shiwen glanced at the entire Constellation sect's formation. Although it was also incomparably brilliant, it was undoubtedly much weaker than the heavenly cycle great star formation that he knew. The martial power of the Demon Emperor back then was probably far superior to the current Star Emperor. Even if Star Emperor's main direction of cultivation was the power of the stars, the use of the power of the stars was much worse than that of the ancient heavenly court. Although the myriad heavens as a whole was lacking compared to the fortune realm, the outstanding figures were not inferior at all. Yi Shiwen picked up the teacup and took a sip of the spirit tea. Suddenly, his mouth was full of fragrance. Ordinary people did not have the opportunity to drink this level of top-notch tea. Even the Quasi-Emperor did not have such an opportunity. Only the masters of the Emperor Lord level could have such a chance. I'm really sorry for taking the liberty to stay in your sect this time, Yi Shiwen said. It's nothing. If you like it, why not stay here? Star Emperor had completely let go of the grudge at this time. Anyway, there was no harm. On the contrary, Yi Shiwen had cultivated a super genius for their sect who might enter the Emperor Lord level in the future. No matter which sect it was, even the high and mighty Emperor would have a whole new level of respect for those super talented geniuses. Not long ago, they were also one of these people. If their great sects wanted to develop, they couldn't do without the help of these super geniuses. Yi Shiwen faintly smiled and said, I think Taoist friends should be aware of my current situation. I'm afraid that heavenly Taoism won't let me off. I reckon that it won't take long for them to find out about today's matter. And they will come looking for me at that time. Star Emperor frowned slightly. What happened today had indeed caused a great disturbance. Even he, the leader, had come in person. It would not take long for this news to spread to the Taoism of heavenly law. Apart from themselves, no one knew how many chess pieces the heavenly Tao sect had buried in the Constellation sect. Similarly, he had also secretly planted some spies in the heavenly Tao sect. This was almost a semi-public matter. While everyone was desperately looking for the spies that the other sects had inserted, they also turned a blind eye to it. Fellow cultivator, you are very frank, Star Emperor said. Now, Taoist friends should have achieved a breakthrough in your closed-door training. Yi Shiwen raised his head and looked at Star Emperor. He asked about the situation of his cultivation breakthrough. Based on the relationship between the two of them, it was definitely a deep conversation. However, Yi Shiwen didn't know what Star Emperor wanted to do. Indeed, it's not bad. Yi Shiwen's mind flickered slightly, and then he said, May I know where Taoist friend wants to go next? As far as I know, the entire eastern region is under the control of the heavenly Tao sect. It's impossible to even leave the eastern region, said Star Emperor. This time, even several old monsters of the heavenly Tao sect who have not come out of closed-door training for many years have come out together. It can be seen that they value Taoist friend very much. Speaking till here, he couldn't help but sigh in his heart. The person in front of him was really too valiant. Although he didn't deal with the Heavenly Tao sect, he didn't dare to kill the emperor of the Heavenly Tao sect in an above-board situation. Although they were both big sects, the gap between the Constellation sect, which only had one emperor, and the Heavenly Tao sect, which had many experts, was simply unimaginable. If he really did it, then the Constellation sect would only end up being exterminated. However, the person in front of him didn't have any burden of the sect. Naturally, he did things without any taboos. Later, I will go to the outer region. At that time, I will need Taoist friend to take care of Sun Ziwang, said Yi Shiwen. He didn't hide anything in this regard. Anyway, he was going to leave soon. It was too late for the Heavenly Tao sect to encircle and intercept him. What are you talking about, Taoist friend? No matter what, Sun Ziwang is an outstanding disciple of our Constellation sect. This is what I should do. Even if the Heavenly Tao sect wants to come and ask for him, they have to see if I agree or not. Star Emperor nodded and said, as the supreme leader of the Constellation sect, he naturally couldn't let the Heavenly Tao sect act presumptuously here. However, if Taoist friend is going to the outer region, I wonder if you are interested in cooperating with me, said Star Emperor. Cooperation? What kind of cooperation? Yi Shiwen suddenly became interested. Generally speaking, if it was an ordinary matter, there was nothing that a sovereign emperor couldn't handle. Why would he need to cooperate with others? To tell you the truth, some time ago, I found an extremely ancient Heavenly Master's remnant prescription. This remnant prescription recorded a kind of medicinal pill that can help sovereign emperors below the 7th realm to break through. After tens of thousands of years, several Taoist friends and I have worked tirelessly to fill in the gaps and finally completed this remnant prescription. Most of the heavenly treasures in this remnant prescription have been collected. However, we are still missing the most crucial one. This heavenly treasure is not in the Fortune God dynasty, but in the outer region. Therefore, I would like to invite Taoist friend to go together with us. When the medicinal pill is refined, we will share one with Taoist friend according to our previous agreement. What do you think? Said Star Emperor. Hiss. Even with Yi Shiwen's cultivation, he couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. It was hard to imagine that it could help a sovereign emperor to break through to the next realm, even if it was only for a sovereign emperor below the 7th realm. Once it was released, it would immediately set off a great uproar in the Fortune God dynasty. Countless people would immediately come to fight for it. Even sovereign emperors would find it difficult to resist such temptation. At that time, the entire Fortune God dynasty would probably fall apart. If he had this medicinal pill, Yi Shiwen could be sure that even the 5th realm was just around the corner. He had just stepped into the 4th realm, and now even the 5th realm was within reach. It was needless to say how attractive it was to Yi Shiwen. But why did Taoist friend tell me such a top-secret matter? I think there are many people who are willing to help Taoist friend. Yi Shiwen immediately collected his thoughts and asked. Indeed, as long as we reveal the matter of the medicinal pill, many people will be willing to come forward to help. However, does Taoist friend think that my Constellation sect can keep such a medicinal pill? Once it attracts the attention of heavenly Taoism or even a colossus like the Fortune God dynasty, our lives will be in danger. Star Emperor immediately revealed the truth with a bitter smile. Taoist friend, you are alone, and you have a deep hatred for heavenly Taoism. Naturally, you are the most suitable candidate to join our team. From what Taoist friend said, are the others also rogue cultivators? Yi Shiwen suddenly became a little interested and asked. Although they are not rogue cultivators, they do not have the background of those big sections. At most, they are on the same level as me. Star Emperor said, for safety reasons, we do not dare to look for those with the background of those big sects, nor do we dare to look for those with outstanding strength. Otherwise, wouldn't we be helping others? So, Taoist friend, you also know our difficulties. There are not many people in the past tens of thousands of years. Yi Shiwen nodded. It was related to such a thing, no matter how careful they were. If this matter were to spread, the consequences would be unimaginable. If Taoist friend agrees, from now on, Taoist friend cannot leave for a period of time. You can only go with me to the outer domain to meet with other Taoist friends, Star Emperor said. Yi Shiwen considered for a long time, but he still could not resist the temptation of this medicinal pill. So, he said, "Okay." Seeing that Yi Shiwen agreed, Star Emperor was slightly relieved. If Yi Shiwen did not agree, it would be a little troublesome for him. He had already said it. If Yi Shiwen were to spread it, the consequences would be unimaginable. In that case, we might as well go now. If we continue to wait, I am afraid that the people of heavenly Taoism will arrive soon. Star Emperor suggested. As Taoist friend says. Yi Shiwen nodded. The people of heavenly Taoism would arrive soon. Although he was not afraid of anything, he did not want to contend with them too early. In that case, come with me. There is a one-way transmission array in our Myriad Stars Temple. It can directly teleport to near the border of the outer domain, Star Emperor said. This kind of transmission array was available in many big sections. It could help them move in time. At the most critical moment, it could even be a life-saving moment. However, because the teleportation place was a dangerous place like the outer domain, it could only be a one-way transmission array. It could not be a two-way transmission array. Yi Shiwen quickly entered the depths of the Myriad Stars Temple under the guidance of Star Emperor. A huge transmission array was emitting a faint light. The two stepped into the transmission array. The surrounding space was distorted. Yi Shiwen only felt his vision blur. Suddenly, he disappeared from the Myriad Stars Temple of the Myriad Stars sect. Chapter 30-40. The border of the outer domain was a lawless area. It was also the extension of the Fortune God dynasty's rule. Outside of this emperor's body, it was a world of endless powerful creatures from the outer domain. No one knew how many powerful existences were hiding in the outer domain. There were tyrannical and violent creatures from the outer domain, and there were also powerhouses who were not tolerated by the Fortune God dynasty. It was precisely because of this that the outer domain became more and more dangerous. Even the gods did not dare to go too far, and the number of people who died in the outer domain was unknown. Even emperors could only protect themselves, and there was also the risk of death. In the records of the Fortune God dynasty, the number of emperors who died in the outer domain was the highest, and the number of emperors who died in the outer domain was innumerable. Among them, there were peerless masters of the Fortune God dynasty, and at the same time, there were super powerhouses who lived in the outer domain. In order to resist the invasion of the outer domain, the Fortune God dynasty set up outpost cities one after another in the eastern domain's border. These cities were also powerful fortresses with extremely strong defensive power, enough to resist the invasion of the outer domain's creatures. The border between the eastern domain and the outer domain was an endless sea of storms. In this sea of storms, each huge island was like a small continent, and there was a city-fortress built on it. No one knew how many people lived in these cities. When Yi Shiwen regained his sight, he had already appeared in the middle of an endless sea. This sea was more violent than any he had seen before. Even with his eyesight as an emperor, he couldn't see through this sea. Even if the emperor's magical power was greatly suppressed in the fortune world, it was still extremely amazing. However, this endless sea of storms was only a part of the outer domain that was connected to the eastern domain. At this time, Yi Shiwen finally understood why the people of the Fortune God dynasty would change their expressions when they talked about the outer domain. It was too vast, and no one knew how many tyrannical creatures there were. This was definitely a colossus that could rival the Fortune God dynasty. Yi Shiwen looked around and saw violent storms and tornadoes everywhere. They could casually blow up hundreds of thousands of feet tall, terrifying hurricanes. Countless formidable auras were hidden in these hurricanes. It seemed as if these hurricanes were moving demon lairs. These hurricanes could easily reach hundreds of thousands of feet in height, or even millions of feet in height. Yi Shiwen could see dozens of them at a glance. And this didn't include the hurricanes that were forming or leaving in the distance. He floated in the air. Although he was already tens of thousands of meters high, a wave came crashing down on him and the Star Emperor. It was 20 to 30,000 meters high. Bastard, you're courting death! A sharp glint flashed across Star Emperor's eyes. He abruptly slapped his palm, which instantly turned into a huge falling star and smashed into the incoming wave. Bang! Although the wave was huge, how could it compete with the power of the Star Emperor? It was smashed into pieces in an instant. One of the fierce sea beasts had just revealed itself when it was smashed into pieces. Its blood spilled into the seawater, which quickly attracted even more powerful sea beasts to devour it. Although all of this happened in an instant, Yi Shiwen still saw everything clearly. Although this ferocious beast was strong, it was only in the Divine King realm. It actually dared to attack an emperor with just its ferocious strength. It was really courting death. However, even Yi Shiwen felt a little apprehensive about the harsh environment of this stormy sea region. Extremely powerful ominous beasts could be seen almost everywhere. The most frightening thing was that these ominous beasts were nurtured by nature. They weren't cultivated. Most of them didn't have any spiritual wisdom. Just like the ominous beast of God King level that had been casually killed by the Star Emperor. In other places, this kind of strength was enough to become an immortal. But here, it was just a fierce sea beast without much spiritual wisdom. The more it was like this, the more terrifying it was. In this way, the real overlords in the outer domain must be tyrannical to an unimaginable extent. Fortunately, most of these fierce sea beasts had no spiritual wisdom. No matter how strong they were still slightly inferior without spiritual wisdom. Otherwise, the entire Fortune God dynasty would have been occupied by these outer domain creatures. At this time, he suddenly recalled the history of the Fortune world that Fairy Tianmiao had mentioned. In the distant past, in an era where even the history could not be investigated, the Fortune world was in a desolate era. It was an era where fierce beasts ran amok. All intelligent lifeforms trembled under the tyranny of these fierce beasts. They were not a match for these fierce beasts. It was not until a supreme being appeared out of nowhere and took control of the Fortune world, sweeping away everything and establishing the Fortune God dynasty. Only then did the Fortune world create a land for the various races to flourish, isolating them from the outer domain. Back then, countless intelligent races had followed that paragon and waged war against the living beings of the outer realms. No one knew how long that war had lasted. They only knew that Paragon had used the power of creation to sweep through the outer realms one by one. Those invincible existences from the outer realms that had shaken the world had either been killed or suppressed, never to appear again for all eternity. Those who could be recorded by the later generations were super powerhouses with the title of Heavenly Venerables. The fallen emperors didn't even have a title, let alone those below the emperor realm. It was a super chaotic world where human lives were as cheap as grass. Because of this, the various races still believed in the rule of the Fortune God dynasty. If it weren't for the existence of that supreme, many races would still be trembling under the rule of the outer domain creatures, not daring to utter a word. Yi Shiwen sighed inwardly. However, Star Emperor didn't seem surprised at all and said, "Let's go, we'll talk after entering Storm City." As Star Emperor said this, he stepped on a ray of light and flew towards a small continent hundreds of thousands of miles away. Yi Shiwen glanced at that small island which looked like a small continent. An incomparably huge city towered on the island. Enchantments could be seen everywhere. Formidable practitioners and ferocious ominous beasts were fighting everywhere in the surroundings of the city. Some ominous beasts were killed by the practitioners, and some practitioners were swallowed by the ominous beasts in one bite. Death was the eternal theme here. It had long been a common sight here, and no one showed the slightest bit of surprise. But soon Yi Shiwen caught up with Star Emperor. Both of them were Emperor level masters, and their speed was unimaginably fast. Hundreds of thousands of miles only took a moment for them to arrive at the city. As an Emperor, even if Star Emperor didn't submit to the Fortune God dynasty, his status was still extremely noble. He could freely enter and exit these supercities, and didn't need to be checked like others, as long as his identity was verified. But as an Emperor level master, no one dared to pretend to be one. Otherwise they would be courting death. When Star Emperor and Yi Shiwen disappeared into the city, an old man lying on a reclining chair opened his eyes in the shadow of the city gate. Beside him stood a young man. Write down that Star Emperor came today with a green-robed young man. He is suspected to be Yi Shiwen, whom Heavenly Taoism has been hunting recently. If this is true, there will be one more person on the list of people to pay special attention to in this city. Inform the little bastards to recognize people based on drawings. Don't provoke him, or else no one will collect their corpses when they die. The old man rambled on, and the young man next to him began to record everything the old man said into a jade slip. In the Fortune God dynasty, emperors were extremely rare, but here they were very common. This was because this was the front line of the war in the Jade Outer Territory. In this stormy sea, there were many natural treasures that even emperors coveted. All of this was no longer strange. Master, don't we need to inform Heavenly Taoism? The young man asked cautiously. The old man opened his eyes and glanced at the young man, then he said, "Why do we need to inform the Heavenly Tao sect? We are not the disciples of the Heavenly Tao sect, so we have no obligation to help them find people. Besides, we are the people of the divine imperial court. The fiercer these people fight, the better. In the past few years, these great sects have become more and more arrogant. Just remember one thing. Although the divine dynasty needs their strength to fight against the creatures of the outer realms, and many of these foreign sects are officials of the divine dynasty, it doesn't mean that we are on the same side as them. We have conflicts with them, but we also cooperate with them. You have to keep a good grasp of this. There are conflicts, but there are also cooperation. I understand." The young man nodded and said. The old man looked at the young man and said, "Boy, how can I not know what you are thinking? You like Fairy Tian Miao of Nine Nether Cult. Some time ago, there was news that Yi Shiwen took Fairy Tian Miao as his maid. You have been brooding about this for a long time." "Master, you already know," the young man said in a somewhat depressed tone. "You want to hide such an obvious matter from me? But I will teach you one more thing. Let's not talk about whether this matter is true or false. What can you do even if Yi Shiwen takes Fairy Tian Miao as his maid? To put it cruelly, who do you think you are? Do you think you are worthy of scheming against a person like him? You better get rid of this idea. Otherwise, you won't even know how you died. This old man doesn't want to collect your corpse." The old man looked at the youth and said with a serious expression, "As long as you don't become an emperor, you'll always be an ant. Even if you become an emperor one day, it's best that you don't have such thoughts. Even the Azura Saint Emperor couldn't stop him for long. You're simply tired of living if you want to cause trouble for him." "Yes, master." The young man struggled for a moment, but eventually nodded. Chapter 3041. You don't have to look like you're unconvinced, because you don't have the qualifications. If he wanted to kill you, he could kill you 1,000,000 times with just a thought. The old man looked at his young disciple, and said in a rare serious tone, "How are you any different from an ant in front of him? Alas, you've had a smooth sailing life these years. But it's also because of this that you've been too complacent. I don't have my skills now, and I haven't taught you how terrifying an emperor is. In front of an emperor, all worldly powers are a joke. I am a quasi-emperor. The young man couldn't help but talk back. Quasi-emperor? What are quasi-emperors in front of emperors? Those who can escape from the hands of emperors are already praised for thousands of years. Why do you think that is? The old man's expression became more and more serious as he said, "Didn't you receive the information from the celestial pole island? Hundreds of heavenly Tao sects quasi-emperors only lasted a little longer than him. Isn't Bai Daozi stronger than you? In the end, he killed you easily even with a Tao tool. Moreover, he was seriously injured. You are too weak in front of him. Don't talk about Yi Shiwen. Even I can kill you effortlessly even if I'm not at my peak. Master, can't you beat him even at your peak?" The young man looked at the old man and asked. "At my peak? I don't know. I don't have the power I had in the past. I can't see through Yi Shiwen's strength now. I can only tell you that he is very strong. He is not weak among the emperors. No matter what ideas you have, you'd better put them away. You must be tired of living to plot against an emperor. The old man said seriously, "Also, help me send a message to the Heavenly Tao sect. Tell them that Yi Shiwen doesn't come from a big sect. It's best to rope him in. Especially since he has offended Heavenly Tao sect. This is the best time to rope him in." The young man recorded all this in a jade slip. He couldn't help but ask, "Master, aren't you afraid that Heavenly Tao sect will be dissatisfied by roping in Yi Shiwen?" The old man sneered. "Heavenly Tao sect will be dissatisfied? You are too naive. Let's see what they dare to do." Although the Heavenly Path sect is already the leader of many great sects, they are still outsiders. Compared to our divine dynasty, their strength is still too weak. Our divine dynasty has 4 great holy venerables to suppress all directions, and only Eastern Holy Venerate has the power of one domain. As long as he is willing to pay a certain price, he can suppress the Heavenly Path sect. You weren't even an ant when you faced Yi Shiwen because of the disparity in strength. Heavenly Tao couldn't stand up against my divine imperial court because of strength. This is the foundation of everything. Why would I guard the city gate if I didn't lose my strength?" The old man lay down on the reclining chair and squinted his eyes. "You've been looking at this for all these years? Strength is the foundation of everything in this world. Strength is the foundation of everything in this world. Strength. The young man clenched his fists and looked in the direction where Yi Shiwen had disappeared. There was a bit of uneasiness in his eyes. Yi Shiwen followed the Star Emperor into the depths of the city. He didn't know the conversation between the master and disciple. After all, they were not in the myriad heavens. Otherwise, he would have sensed it the moment his name was mentioned. Heavenly secrets were in his grasp. The heavenly Tao of the Fortune God dynasty was even more unfathomable. Yi Shiwen couldn't control it to that extent with his current strength. However, this wasn't a bad thing. He couldn't control other people's heavenly secrets at any time and anywhere. Similarly, others couldn't control his heavenly secrets either. Otherwise, he would have been found by the Heavenly Tao sect long ago. Under the guidance of the Star Emperor, they entered an inn. Yi Shiwen was a bit amazed that this inn seemed to be in the city. In fact, it was in the depths of a different space. Without an acquaintance to lead the way, one wouldn't even be able to find the entrance. There were many such buildings in this city. Many of them even existed in the form of microcosms. This city itself was very big. There were hundreds of millions of cultivators living in it. If these microcosms were added, the existence of the subspace would be even bigger. Along the way, the Star Emperor also mentioned that this storm city wasn't an ordinary city. Even among the many cities established by the Fortune Divine Dynasty, it could be ranked in the top 20. Since its establishment, it had never been breached. In fact, it had been besieged by many foreign emperor-level masters, but it had never fallen. Therefore, it had attracted more and more people to settle down in this city. The most important thing to survive in the outer domain was safety. Once the city was breached, it would be a massacre. Often, the people who could escape in the end were just a few. The others would be submerged in the endless army of ominous beasts and become the food of the ominous beasts. Usually, in this storm city, this is our stronghold. Everyone has a room. It's a subspace. When the time comes, Taoism friend will also have a room, said the Star Emperor. Star Emperor, why did you bring someone else here? Not long after Yi Shiwen and Star Emperor entered the inn, suddenly, an interrogative voice came down. Fierce Ghost Emperor, this time I brought a newcomer, said the Star Emperor. A newcomer? Star Emperor, you know very well what kind of situation we are in. Under normal circumstances, we will not easily recruit newcomers, said the fierce Ghost Emperor directly. I know, but the person I introduced is not an ordinary person. He should be able to help us, said the Star Emperor calmly. Can he help us? Suddenly, a figure appeared in front of the two. It was a middle-aged man dressed in an extremely ancient costume. It was unknown which era this costume belonged to. However, this man had a pair of horns on the top of his head. His face was ashen, as if it had been splashed with paint. His body exuded a little ghost aura, but it was different from the usual ghost aura. The ghost aura on his body was majestic and dignified. Yi Shiwen immediately saw that this was a ghost cultivator who had become an emperor. This was the first time that Yi Shiwen had seen a ghost emperor. There had never been a case of a ghost cultivator becoming an emperor in the myriad world. The most promising ghost emperor had been killed by an emperor lord. Since then, no ghost cultivator had been able to cultivate to that level. After the ghost cultivator became an emperor, the original gloomy nature changed and began to become majestic. This Taoism friend is a martial emperor, said the Star Emperor. Martial emperor? The fierce ghost emperor glanced at Yi Shiwen. This title was not ordinary, and it was not something that ordinary people could afford. Compared to a title like the fierce ghost emperor, it was undoubtedly several levels higher. While the fierce ghost emperor was looking at Yi Shiwen was also looking at him. It seemed that his cultivation was not shallow. Among the three people present, Yi Shiwen's cultivation seemed to be the highest. He had already entered the fourth realm. The Star Emperor and the fierce ghost emperor were both at the peak of the third realm. They were weaker than Yi Shiwen, who had not broken through. Because Yi Shiwen's strength was still above them, he could easily see their cultivation. No wonder they looked for him. The third realm was only the initial stage of the emperor. If they attracted the attention of a powerful emperor, the consequences would be unimaginable. It was not something they could resist at all. Since the Star Emperor introduced him, I won't say anything more. It's always good to have another helper. The fierce ghost emperor did not say anything in the end. They were all on the same level as the emperor. No one was inferior to the other. He just entered a step earlier, so he was not qualified to say anything. Is there a newcomer? Then, an old voice sounded. An old man with an old face and a stooped gait slowly walked down. Old Ginseng, I haven't seen you for many years. Your complexion is still very good. Congratulations, the Star Emperor said as he cupped his hands and secretly transmitted a message to Yi Shiwen. Only then did Yi Shiwen know that this old man with an old face was actually a 10-million-year-old ginseng. Even he could not help but be moved. This kind of creature was born with heavenly treasures. It was very rare for them to be able to achieve Tao. It was even very difficult for them to survive. That was because heavenly treasures would inevitably cause countless people to fight over them. It was also a rare opportunity for it to be able to grow safely for tens of millions of years. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was a blessing. It was no wonder that it could achieve Tao in the end. Among these people, the old man's cultivation was clearly higher than the others. It seemed to be a bit more profound than Yi Shiwen, who had just entered the fourth realm. However, it was hard to say if they really fought. Yi Shiwen naturally did not call himself the emperor for nothing. In terms of fighting methods, he was not afraid of anyone in the same realm. "Ah, I'm old," the old man sighed. Among these people, he was the one who had cultivated for the longest time. It was not easy for heavenly treasures to achieve Tao. He had cultivated for tens of millions of years before he was born. He had experienced countless life and death tribulations to reach where he was today. Although Yi Shiwen could also be considered to have cultivated for a long time, compared to the old man, he was not even a fraction of his age. "Old Ginseng is very polite," Yi Shiwen said. "Star Emperor, do you want to bring him in to replace the Feather Emperor?" the old man asked. "Yes, Martial Emperor has a profound cultivation and tyrannical combat strength. He should be able to replace the Feather Emperor and make up for the lack of combat strength caused by the Feather Emperor," the Star Emperor said. "Fellow Star Emperor, may I know who this Feather Emperor is?" Yi Shiwen secretly transmitted a message. The Feather Emperor was originally a member of our small group. Unfortunately, he encountered an Emperor-level creature in the outer domain and was seriously injured. He is now recuperating and will not recover for at least 100,000 years. However, we do not have that much time to wait for him to recover, so we asked you to join us," the Star Emperor said bluntly. Chapter 3042. In terms of the recovery ability of the Emperor realm, it might be a very serious injury in the eyes of ordinary people. However, for the Emperor Realm Lord, it could be recovered in a moment. If it was so serious that it would take 100,000 years to recover, then it would almost be regarded as a fatal injury. Didn't Yi Shiwen only spend more than 100 years to recover after being severely injured by Emperor Hunyuan Yuan? From this, it could be seen how dangerous it was in the outer domain. Even an Emperor Lord could be seriously injured or even killed. One of the main reasons why our matter has been delayed until now is that Yu Emperor was seriously injured and couldn't appear. However, with the addition of fellow Taoist Martial Emperor, we can make up for the lack of combat power of Yu Emperor. Star Emperor sighed. Yu Emperor's combat power was the strongest among them. It was a pity that he was seriously injured. Otherwise, their plan would have been carried out a long time ago. "By the way, where is Dan Emperor?" Star Emperor asked. Dan Emperor went to prepare other magical materials for alchemy. He should be back soon. "Don't worry, everyone," Elderkin said. "What is everyone gathered here for?" Suddenly, a figure jumped in. It was a man dressed in a royal robe. He had a graceful and luxurious temperament. Yi Shiwen instantly sensed him the moment he walked in. This was because this man had a somewhat familiar aura. The martial arts he learned clearly came from the same source. Countless years flashed in Yi Shiwen's mind. He was very familiar with the name Dan Emperor. He once broke into the divine Dan realm and obtained great benefit. Dan Emperor was the eldest disciple of Dan Emperor. He was also the strongest one. In the end, he betrayed Dan Emperor and was killed by Dan Emperor himself. Dan Emperor quickly noticed Yi Shiwen's existence. He also sensed that Yi Shiwen's martial arts were somewhat familiar, just like Yi Shiwen had sensed it. However, he didn't say much. He just asked, "This is Martial Emperor. I invited him to replace the lack of combat power of Yu Emperor." Star Emperor said quickly, "I see. Greetings, fellow Taoist Martial Emperor." Dan Emperor bowed slightly. Yi Shiwen also bowed in return. Although both of them had some speculations in their hearts, they didn't say it out loud. "Since everyone is here, we can consider heading to the outer realm," Elderkin said. Everyone's expression was somewhat grave. In reality, this was not an easy task. A place that required 5 sovereign emperors to gather was obviously very dangerous. "Yes, it's time to think about it. Everything has been prepared. Once we get the last main ingredient, everything will be perfect," Dendin nodded. I wonder what the final main ingredient is? Yi Shiwen asked. Star Sovereign, haven't you told Taoist Martial Emperor yet? Can Elder asked as he glanced at the Star Sovereign. Star Emperor shook his head. However, the crowd could understand. Under such circumstances, they had to be as cautious as possible. Once the news spread, the consequences would be unimaginable. No one knew how many experts it would attract. You can say it now. We're about to set off anyway, so let me say it. Denda glanced at Yi Shiwen indifferently. The last main ingredient is something called phaseless spirit bone. This thing only appears after the death of some extremely powerful Emperor-level creatures. Yi Shiwen's pupils slightly contracted. The so-called Emperor-level creatures were the powerhouses of sovereign Emperor level in the outer realm. They could also be regarded as extremely tyrannical creatures. However, they were different from sovereign emperors. These extremely powerful creatures didn't cultivate the principles like many sovereign emperors. Instead, they had innate magical powers. They slowly cultivated their magical powers, and as long as there was a certain opportunity, they could transform into Emperor-level creatures. These terrifying Emperor-level creatures had formidable destructive power and fighting strength comparable to sovereign emperors. However, they didn't have the ability to cultivate the principles. Therefore, these people couldn't get rid of the shackles of the principles. The most fatal point was that their lifespan was limited. Although their lifespan was very long because of their unparalleled cultivation, it was as if there was no limit. However, in fact, their lifespan still had an end. Even the most powerful Emperor-level creatures couldn't escape the road of death. They would still die after living for millions of years. This was also the most important reason why the Fortune God dynasty could maintain a balance with the outer realm creatures. Whether these Emperor-level creatures were killed or not, they would naturally die of old age. Although this process would take a long time, they would still die in the end. In contrast, the sovereign emperors of the Fortune God dynasty could live forever as long as they weren't killed or seriously injured. Their strength would grow stronger and stronger. This was the fundamental reason why the Fortune God dynasty could suppress the outer realm. However, even so, those Emperor-level creatures that could automatically cultivate to the sovereign Emperor level with their own bloodline were still unimaginably terrifying. However, as a sovereign emperor, Dendi had enough capital to challenge those Emperor-level creatures. In fact, he was even stronger than them. Dendi used the word extremely powerful to describe the Emperor-level creatures that could leave behind phaseless spirit bone. How strong were they? How strong? Yi Shiwen asked. It may be the ninth realm, or even more powerful Emperor-level creatures that can only be born after they pass away. Therefore, this phaseless spirit bone is very difficult to find. The clans that possess the phaseless spirit bone, without exception, are all extremely powerful behemoths comparable to super sects, Denda said. Everyone's expression became a little dignified. What kind of concept was comparable to super sects? Heavenly Taoism was a super sect, and Nine Nether Holy Cult was a super sect. Compared to these super sects, the Constellation sect founded by the Star Emperor was considered powerful, but it wasn't worth mentioning. And the phaseless spirit bone could only be left behind by the ninth realm or even more powerful Emperor-level creatures after they passed away. Without exception, it was of utmost importance. It was a peerless treasure that was closely guarded by all the forces. If they wanted to get their hands on it, it would be no less difficult than breaking into the Heavenly Taoism sect to make a scene and snatch the faceless spiritual bone away. At this time, Yi Shiwen finally understood why they hadn't taken any action for so many years. Although they knew the Dan recipe, it wasn't easy to find the main ingredient. There was no replicability at all. Being able to succeed even once was already a stroke of luck. Even if the person who took action was an Emperor-level master, it was no exception. Then, what do you plan to do this time? Yi Shiwen asked. It's very simple. After many years of investigation, we found a clan, the sky-devouring ominous Python clan. This clan is also considered as an overlord in the Stormy Sea region. They once had an ancestor of the ninth realm. After that ancestor passed away, there hasn't been another expert of that level. Although there are a few experts in the clan, they are far from what they used to be. If there's hope, then this might be the most promising one, Denda said. You plan to break into the sky-devouring ominous Python clan and seize the phaseless spirit bone? Yi Shiwen couldn't help but be slightly surprised by this bold plan. This was indeed not a decision that an ordinary person could make. Yes, this is the only way. If we can't gather the last main ingredient, then our hopes will be dashed. Denda nodded. Elder Kan was the strongest among these people. He had the strength of the peak of the fourth realm, followed by Dan Di and Yi Shiwen. Both of them had surpassed the fourth realm. Everyone else had the strength of the third realm. However, Dan Di was actually the leader. That was because he had the elixir recipe. Even the many divine materials needed for the elixir recipe were gathered by him. His words were very useful in this small group. It was very difficult to advance to the emperor level. The advancement of each realm was like ascending to the heavens. This was the fundamental reason why everyone was willing to spend tens of thousands of years to prepare. Yi Shiwen's progress speed was already like a miracle among the many emperor-level masters. Dendi had attained the heavenly Taoism many years earlier than Yi Shiwen in the myriad heavens. However, Yi Shiwen had already caught up to his current cultivation. From this, it could be imagined how abnormal Yi Shiwen's current cultivation speed was. No matter what, although there are risks, we still have to give it a try. Ominous Ghost Emperor said with a dignified expression. Compared to Old Kan, Yi Shiwen, and Dendi, he needed to cultivate from the third realm to the fourth realm. It was a completely different realm. It was needless to say how difficult it was. Even Yi Shiwen had prepared for so many years. Therefore, among these people, only he and Star Emperor were the most eager to refine the Dan. Now that I've told you the risks, what do you think? Dendi asked. At this moment, everyone's eyes turned to Yi Shiwen. After hearing such an important matter, they naturally couldn't let Yi Shiwen leave so easily. Count me in. Yi Shiwen agreed immediately. Even without everyone's invisible threat, he still had to do it. The more he cultivated, the more he could feel the difficulty of cultivation. He didn't know how long it would take for him to reach the fifth realm with normal cultivation. This didn't fit with his plan. Good, Taoist Martial Emperor is really straightforward, Star Emperor said with a loud laugh. Well, in that case, please go and prepare, Taoist Martial Emperor. We will set off soon. Old Kan said. Okay. Yi Shiwen was about to go to the room prepared for him in this inn. Suddenly, Denda's voice came from behind. Taoist Martial Emperor, please wait. It was transmitted through secret sound transmission. Obviously, Denda didn't want others to know about this matter. Yi Shiwen remained calm and quickly entered the room reserved for him. After a while, Denda's figure appeared. However, it was just a divine sense clone. Chapter 3043. What's the matter, Alchemy Emperor Fellow? Yi Shiwen asked. Alchemy Emperor Fellow, let's get straight to the point. If I'm not mistaken, Alchemy Emperor Fellow should be from the myriad heavens. Alchemy Emperor said slowly. There was another small dimension in the room of this inn. The range was very wide, and the defensive measures were excellent. Even an emperor couldn't hear what was being said inside. Moreover, Alchemy Emperor came quietly, so he didn't alarm anyone. That's right, if I'm not mistaken, Alchemy Emperor Fellow should be the only legendary Alchemy Emperor who advanced through alchemy, Yi Shiwen said slowly. Although Alchemy Emperor was a senior to him, they were now on equal footing. It was enough for him to maintain sufficient respect for Alchemy Emperor. Legend? Have I finally become a legend? Alchemy Emperor's mouth flashed a helpless smile. Even an emperor can't be glorious throughout the ages. I should be grateful that someone remembers me. Alchemy Emperor Fellow established the alchemy lineage in the myriad heavens. I don't know how many people have left behind, so it's natural for you to be remembered, Yi Shiwen said. In the universe, not all sovereign emperors were remembered by people. They had to have made great contributions. For a sovereign emperor to be remembered, it was definitely not only because of his unparalleled achievements. Most importantly, it was because he decided to spread martial arts to many commoners, allowing the power of the human race to recover. His name was also praised for eternity. Alchemy Emperor was the same. He established the alchemy lineage, so that the alchemy practitioners could be compared with many other martial arts. He established a supreme path, so as long as the alchemy lineage was not destroyed, his prestige could be praised for eternity. In the myriad heavens, perhaps my Tao is considered unique, but in this fortune realm, it's not necessarily so, Alchemy Emperor said. In the myriad heavens and realms, the heavenly Tao did not allow different people to prove their Tao with the same Tao. This was also why no one after the Pill Emperor could become an emperor through the Pill Tao. However, in the fortune realm, it was a completely different situation. The heavenly Tao of the fortune realm was of a higher level than the heavenly Tao of the myriad heavens and realms. It could actually allow similar Tao of emperors to coexist. In other words, it was just as Yi Shiwen had guessed at the beginning. All the great ways had been opened up by people one after another. That was why there were countless people who could prove their Tao and become gods, but only a few people could become emperors. Because the path to godhood had already been opened by countless people could automatically become emperors by following this path. However, the paths of the Empyreans were intermittent. Every path was a steep mountain path. Those Empyreans might be able to make it through due to their personal circumstances and walk very far, but that was only them alone. They did not open up a path that was easy for their descendants to traverse. This was also why the number of Empyreans was always so small. However, in the Fortune Divine Dynasty, even Empyreans were not a small number. Some of the paths of Empyreans had already been opened up repeatedly, opening up a path that was simply unimaginable to people in the fortune realm. Just like the tribes that had produced emperor-level masters, they were able to produce them continuously because their paths had been truly opened up. They did not need to worry about the problems of ordinary Empyreans during their cultivation. After all, even with Yi Shiwen's current cultivation, it was impossible for him to dictate the cultivation path of others. It was impossible for him to pave the way for others and open up a path for them. This principle was the same. After entering the fortune realm, I realized that I had really underestimated the heroes of the world. The truly glorious world is not limited to the myriad heavens and realms. Alchemy Emperor said with a faint smile. There was a hint of self-deprecation in his expression. One must know that the blow that could make a Empyrean show such an expression could not be described with just a little bit. So, apart from the myriad heavens and the fortune realm, there are other worlds? Yi Shiwen suddenly became spirited and asked. Yes, in the beginning, I thought that the myriad heavens and realms was the limit of everything. Then, I thought that the fortune realm was everything. Later, I gradually realized that the fortune realm is the ultimate plane of many worlds, but it is not just a subordinate plane like the myriad heavens and realms. The myriad heavens and realms is only one of its many subordinate planes. Alchemy Emperor said with a smile, It seems that the martial emperor has not been here for a long time. So many years have passed, and the heavenly Tao of the myriad heavens and realms seems to have been imprisoned. No more Empyrean emperors have been born, let alone old friends from my hometown. That's impossible. Could it be that fellow Taoist has never seen the Qin Emperor? Yi Shiwen asked. The Qin Emperor? Alchemy Emperor frowned slightly and said, I've never seen the great Qin Emperor before. The Fortune Divine Dynasty is simply too big, not to mention there are other foreign domains no smaller than the Fortune Divine Dynasty. The probability of us meeting him is not very high, so I've never seen him before. Listening to fellow Taoist's words, the great Qin emperor must be an extraordinary character. Yi Shiwen paused and told him about the current situation of the myriad heavens and the development and changes of the myriad heavens and realms after Alchemy Emperor left. I see. I didn't expect the Qin emperor to be such a great person. According to what you said, if he was not injured by Emperor Primordial Chaos, we would have met sooner or later. Alchemy Emperor was a little frightened after listening to Yi Shiwen. Too many things had happened in the myriad heavens and realms after he left. He left after the Second War of Resistance against the heavens, and the Qin Emperor became the emperor many years later. So, the two of them actually did not meet each other. However, just listening to Yi Shiwen's rough description, Alchemy Emperor could feel that the amazing human was actually able to tear the heavens shackles of the myriad heavens and realms, crushing the many emperors who besieged him during the shackles period and became the emperor. Alchemy Emperor hated it. If the heaven shackles were shackled, what kind of situation would it be? So he admired Yi Shiwen even more. If it was him, there was no way he could do it. The Qin Emperor was indeed an extraordinary person. Compared with the Qin Emperor, Yi Shiwen was not even the first person to tear the shackles. However, that was not important. Yi Shiwen also tore the shackles period and became the emperor. In the end, he even defeated the Tian clan. Alchemy Emperor, who became the emperor during the Second War of Resistance against the heavens, was very clear about how fierce and terrifying the legendary Tian clan was. Even so, they were driven back by Yi Shiwen in the end. This Yi Shiwen was not an ordinary person. Fellow Taoist's role in the myriad heavens and realms should be far above me. Without fellow Taoist, the orthodoxy of the myriad heavens and realms would be severed. Alchemy Emperor said slowly, I was forced to do it. It's not a big deal. Yi Shiwen said with a faint smile. You don't have to be so polite, fellow Taoist. Being able to do this is indeed extraordinary. It's my honor to know fellow Taoist. Alchemy Emperor laughed heartily and said. Alchemy Emperor didn't wait for Yi Shiwen to continue speaking, and said, I didn't intend to say it at first. However, since fellow Taoist has also become an emperor in the myriad heavens and realms, we can be considered to be from the same hometown. So, I'll mention it to you. Fellow Taoist Emperor, if I'm not mistaken, I'm afraid that you're the Yi Shiwen who has offended the heavenly Taoism. It's indeed me, Yi Shiwen said with a wry smile on the corner of his mouth. That's right. Fellow Taoist is indeed a peerless hero. You dared to go against the heavenly Taoism. Alchemy Emperor said with a smile. Taoist friend, don't tease me. I just happened to be at the right time. I wouldn't have wanted to have a conflict with the heavenly Taoists if they weren't so aggressive. Yi Shiwen said with a bitter smile. That is indeed the case. The heavenly Taoism is almost the #1 sect in the world. Naturally, they are extremely domineering when they do things. Others are simply no match for them. It is indeed admirable that you dared to offend them. Alchemy Emperor said with a smile, however, you are gravely mistaken if you think that your troubles will end here. On the contrary, your troubles have just begun. I heard someone mention this when I was gathering herbs outside. This time, the heavenly Taoism sect has even dispatched a small big shot in order to kill you. They forcibly awakened this small big shot from his closed-door training. Now, they are looking for you all over the world. Storm Wind City is the front line of the resistance against the foreign domains. However, the heavenly Taoism sect still has many spies here. Therefore, I'm afraid that your whereabouts won't be concealed for long. Therefore, you won't be able to escape from us even if you don't want to. Yi Shiwen nodded with a dignified look on his face. Indeed, he had already thought about all of this. It was impossible for the heavenly Taoism sect to leave the matter at that. Perhaps there would be spies of the heavenly Taoism sect as long as there were people around. Moreover, he hadn't been secretive when he had come here. So, it was only a matter of time before he was discovered. However, the intelligence of the alchemy emperor had made him instantly vigilant. Who could be called a small big shot among the emperors? Only the top experts of the 7th realm or above would have such qualifications, and they wouldn't be a small big shot if they were to cultivate to the 9th realm. Instead, they would be a giant and peerless existence. However, even so, the small big shot of the heavenly Taoism sect was still much more tyrannical than Yi Shiwen. It was just as the alchemy emperor had said. The heavenly Taoism sect had paid a huge price in order to hunt down Yi Shiwen. They wanted to kill him as soon as possible. This time, it was obvious that the heavenly Taoism sect had regarded him as a thorn in their side. They couldn't wait to kill him as soon as possible. It felt like killing a chicken with a butcher's knife. He would lose a layer of skin even if he didn't die if he were to stay and fight against the small big shot of the heavenly Taoism sect. Yi Shiwen had no other choice but to leave with the alchemy emperor and the others at this time. Chapter 3044. Previously, Yi Shiwen's whereabouts were uncertain. Once Yi Shiwen's whereabouts were determined, there would be a thunderous attack waiting for him. Yi Shiwen must make all preparations before that. Fortunately, he was not a pushover. Since he had already entered the 4th realm, not everyone could deal with him. The arrow is already on the bowstring. It has to be released. If they want to kill me, it will depend on whether they have such good teeth or not. Yi Shiwen slightly sneered. But no matter what, I still want to thank you for the information you provided. This is nothing. When fellow Taoist stays in this world for a long time, you will naturally have your own sources of information. Even the Fortune God dynasty might be able to provide you with information, Dan Emperor said with a faint smile. Fortune God dynasty? Yi Shiwen whispered. That's right, the Fortune God dynasty is quite wary of a colossus like the heavenly Tao sect. With fellow Taoist strength, you already have the qualifications to be roped in. Who knows, maybe someone from the heavenly Tao sect will come to rope you in, Dan Emperor said. Yi Shiwen's eyes lit up. He looked at Dendi and asked, I don't know if I can ask, but why? I didn't join the Fortune God dynasty. Although joining the Fortune God dynasty is a lot more convenient, there are also a lot of restrictions. I can't be as free as I am now. I am a supreme existence in the heavens. How can I become someone else's subordinate after coming here? Denda shook his head and said with a smile, This is a kind of obsession. It is also a kind of Tao barrier. The Dan Emperor shook his head with a smile and said, This is a kind of obsession, and also a kind of Tao barrier. In fact, it's not just me, there are many emperor monarchs who are the same. Those natives who were born and raised in the Fortune God dynasty were born with the supreme majesty of the Fortune God dynasty since young, so they might not reject it. But those of us who came from other worlds, without exception, are invincible, sweeping through the world, and finally becoming the emperor monarch of a world. How could we be willing to be under others? This is a hurdle that we can't cross. Yi Shiwen nodded. So, that was how it was. However, he didn't care about it in his heart. The Fortune God dynasty was powerful and unparalleled. However, it didn't mean that they would humiliate the emperors. Once they joined the Fortune God dynasty, they would have to obey their orders. However, they didn't have to turn the emperors into slaves. Otherwise, who would be willing to join the Fortune God dynasty and suffer? It was said that in the early years, the Fortune Divine dynasty placed great restrictions on the emperor monarchs from other worlds, and their requirements were extremely harsh. After arriving at the Fortune world, they had to serve the Fortune Divine dynasty, and there were no other options. Unless they defected and fled to the outer domain. Later, the rise of many large sects gave many emperors a chance to catch a breather. They were able to strike a balance between the two sides, and did not have to sell themselves to the Fortune Divine dynasty. Therefore, these idle emperor-emperors often held a neutral view towards the conflict between the Fortune divine dynasty and the large sections. They would not side with either side, because they were very clear that no matter which side won, it would be a great threat to them. So, there should be a lot of foreign emperor-emperors, right? Yi Shiwen asked. Almost half and half. The native emperor-emperors of the Fortune God dynasty occupy half, and the emperor-emperors from other worlds like us occupy the other half. It can be considered as an equal share. Emperor-emperors from other worlds like us have achieved a very high status, whether it is among the large sects or the Fortune God dynasty. Even the founders of some super-large sects are super-experts from other worlds. Dan Emperor nodded and said, "In the early days, there was a huge conflict between us outsiders and the native emperor-emperors. Later, because of the pressure from the outer domain, we reluctantly came together and slowly integrated. Especially after the rise of many large sects, all parties are trying to recruit talents, regardless of whether they are natives or people from other worlds. This slowly formed the current situation, where the status of the emperor-emperors is supreme. Taoist friend is saying that there are people from other worlds who have established super-large sects, and there are also people who hold high positions in the Fortune God dynasty. I wonder if there are such people in the myriad heavens?" Yi Shiwen asked. Speaking of this, Dan Emperor couldn't help but smile bitterly and said, "As far as I know, there shouldn't be. We come from other worlds, so we tend to be very united and help each other. Because in any world, it is often very rare to cultivate to the emperor-emperor realm. Only the emperor-emperors, or even the best among the emperor-emperors, can pass through the layers of barriers to come to the Fortune God realm. In total, there are only a few people from the same hometown. As long as their relationship isn't very bad, they will often take care of each other. If there is such a person in the myriad heavens, as long as he opens his mouth, even the heavenly Taoism will have to give him face, and Taoist friend's crisis will be conveniently resolved." Yi Shiwen thought about it. It was indeed so. As far as he knew, many famous emperor-emperors in the myriad heavens had directly fallen in the battle between each other, and some of them had failed to come to the Fortune God realm because of the surprise attack of the primordial origin emperor on the road of fortune. In the end, there were undoubtedly only a few people who could come here. Although he firmly believed that Emperor Qin must have come, he couldn't even find a trace of Emperor Qin now. Could such an amazing person be drowned in the crowd in the Fortune God realm? He didn't believe it. There must be something that he didn't know. But it doesn't matter. For us cultivators, it is better to rely on ourselves than relying on heaven and earth. Even if the heavenly Taoism wants to kill me, they will have to see if they have the ability to do so," Yi Shiwen said. "Taoist friend is really an extraordinary person." Dan Emperor couldn't help but look at Yi Shiwen in a new light. Facing the encirclement and pursuit of a colossus like the heavenly Taoism, he still had such confidence. Sure enough, those who could cultivate to this stage since ancient times were not ordinary people. He had become an emperor through alchemy. In terms of combat power, he was actually inferior to Yi Shiwen. After all, everyone had their own strength. In terms of alchemy, although these emperor-emperors also knew a little, they were undoubtedly not on the same level as him. By the way, Taoist friend Dan Emperor, please forgive me for being presumptuous. I would like to ask if you can sell this elixir recipe to me. Yi Shiwen thought of something and asked, "What's so difficult about that? I will give it to you directly. In fact, I won't hide it from you. The biggest difficulty of this elixir isn't in deducing its recipe. Instead, it's very difficult to find the ingredients even if the recipe is deduced. For example, the phaseless spirit bone isn't something that people of my level can come into contact with. And those who are qualified to come into contact with this elixir actually don't have much need for it," Dan Emperor said straightforwardly. Yi Shiwen nodded. This elixir was only useful for emperor-emperors below the 7th realm. However, how many emperors below the 7th realm could obtain this phaseless spirit bone? Dan Emperor didn't say anything after he finished speaking. He produced a jade slip out of thin air and handed it over to Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen probed it with his divine sense, and came to know that this pill was called Tai Yi Soul Condensation Pill. It was an extremely high-quality pill. The main ingredient was very difficult to find. Moreover, there were more than 10,000 kinds of medicinal ingredients required to concoct this pill. It was enough to make one dizzy. Moreover, each of them was a priceless heavenly treasure. Any kind of heavenly treasure was indeed a trifle for an Emperor realm expert. However, when tens of thousands of medicinal ingredients were to be found, it would require a huge amount of expenses. Even for emperors, there was a feeling that they would definitely have to spend a lot of money. It could be seen how difficult it was to improve the emperor realm. Many emperors were super geniuses who treated cultivation as simple as eating and drinking before they became emperors. It was as easy as flipping their hands to challenge those above their level. However, all this changed after entering the emperor realm. It was extremely difficult. Every step forward was extremely difficult. These invincible geniuses in the past had no choice but to do everything possible to make a breakthrough. Just closed-door cultivation alone required too much time. At this time, the disparity between having a super force backing them and relying on the Fortune Divine Dynasty was obvious. Whether it was the Fortune Divine Dynasty or a super force, they had countless subordinates and disciples that collected all kinds of divine materials for them. Even though they were also restricted, their cultivation speed was incomparable to the Fortune Divine Dynasty's super forces. It could be said that each had its own advantages and disadvantages. It depended on each person's choice. This elixir formula is one of the rewards for helping me this time, Dan Emperor said. Of course, he knew that the real reward was the elixir. Compared to that, this elixir formula was nothing. Of course, for those super sects or the Fortune God Dynasty, this elixir formula was still very valuable. However, for idle emperors like them, it was a little useless. Yi Shiwen received the elixir formula and left away to contact each other. Although they could not be considered as close allies from now on, compared to ordinary people, they would undoubtedly be closer. In the future, they could also help each other in some matters. The two talked a little more. Especially for Yi Shiwen, he had just arrived in the fortune world and did not understand the current situation. What he learned from Fairy Jiangzhu and Fairy Tianmiao was on a completely different level from what he learned from Dan Emperor, an emperor level expert. Although Fairy Tianmiao came from a super sect, there was no way for her to know more about the inside story of an emperor because a quasi-emperor was just a quasi-emperor. This conversation was also very important for Yi Shiwen, especially about some common knowledge about the outer domain. There were some basic things that Yi Shiwen needed to understand. After understanding these things, Yi Shiwen already had a certain understanding of the current situation. So, he wasn't completely clueless about what was going on. As the two of them chatted, the day of departure arrived. Chapter 30-45. In the base of heavenly Taoism, a figure was sitting cross-legged in the clouds in an extremely majestic small plane that looked like an ancient world. All the laws between heaven and earth froze at this moment and twined around this figure. They were constantly patrolling along with this figure's breathing. It was very terrifying. Suddenly, a stream of light broke through everything and fell into that figure on the spot. After a while, that figure opened his eyes. When he opened his eyes, it was as if the world was being created. The laws between heaven and earth suddenly became active. He was like the legendary god of creation. When he opened his eyes, the world was daytime. When he closed his eyes, the world was dark. The entire world revolved around him. Has Yi Shiwen appeared? It seems that it's finally my turn to move my muscles. A deep and dull voice came from that figure. As soon as his voice fell, his figure disappeared without a trace. However, the truly terrifying thing was that as his figure disappeared, the entire world seemed to have entered doomsday. It began to collapse on the spot. Countless laws collapsed. The world and space also completely collapsed with the departure of that figure. This was not a naturally formed world. It was merely a world that was automatically constructed by many laws when he was comprehending the great path. One could imagine how powerful this person's cultivation was. It had reached an unimaginable level. It could be said that his martial arts were unparalleled. Yi Shiwen, obediently accept your death. Many emperors did not have much time to prepare, especially since Yi Shiwen was being hunted by heavenly Taoism. Therefore, it was time to set off after only 3 days. Several emperors gathered in the lobby downstairs of the inn. Ordinary people would not have imagined that so many emperors would gather in this seemingly ordinary inn. It could be considered a grand scene. Everyone, are you all ready? Alchemy Emperor was the last to come down. His real body had been preparing. Yes, it's ready. Everyone nodded with a solemn expression. Well, let's go. All of them were emperors. Their movement techniques were unbelievably fast. Even if they could not tear the space casually in Storm City, it was enough. In just a few breaths, they had already left Storm City. Walla lala! Everywhere, there were waves as tall as the sky, and in the distance, there were countless demon beasts forming a terrifying hurricane. This was the extremely harsh living environment of the outer domain Stormy Sea region, and this was just the beginning of the environment. Dan Emperor had also explained this situation to Yi Shiwen in the past few days. The heaven-devouring ominous Python clan resided in the depths of the Stormy Sea region. They were the hegemons of a region. They were tyrannical and tyrannical. Even an ordinary emperor wouldn't dare to approach that place. Otherwise, they would be besieged by the emperor-level creatures. Before entering the sky-devouring ominous python's territory, you can attack at will. However, once you enter the territory, you will have to be careful. You must be careful. We plan to infiltrate this time. If we are discovered, the consequences will be unimaginable. Elderkin glanced at the various sovereign emperors as he spoke. Amongst these sovereign emperors, he was the most senior. Thus, he was also the most qualified to say such words. Understood. After everyone finished speaking, beams of light appeared under their feet, and they finally disappeared from the vast surface of the sea. They had used their great powers to forcefully open up a path. Those who were hit along the way would be smashed into pieces on the spot. Apart from emperor-level creatures, these creatures from the outer domain were nothing to the many sovereign emperors. A moment after everyone disappeared, a silhouette slowly appeared in the void. The aura around him was so dense that it seemed to have solidified. It formed a super-domain around him. Under the terrifying aura that he emitted, no ferocious beasts dared to come near him. Otherwise, they would really be courting death. Go, go. Ha ha ha, you will all be my wedding gown in the end. That person's voice was a bit hoarse, and his expression was a bit ferocious. After waiting for a while, that person directly followed the direction in which everyone had left. His speed was also unparalleled. He was also an expert of the emperor level. Yi Shiwen and the others had just entered the Stormy Sea region of the outer region. Suddenly, they saw countless storms sweeping in the distance. These storms were incomparably violent, forming extremely terrifying whirlpools on the surface of the sea. The water whirlpools tore through the void and tore the sky into pieces. They swept up countless ferocious beasts in the water and made their home here. It was unknown how many terrifying creatures were being nurtured in this Stormy Sea region. These storms seemed to be driven by some kind of law and some kind of power. They rushed towards everyone. How dare they? No one panicked. With their eyesight, they could easily tell that these storms were being controlled by the beings from the other realms. They were rushing towards them to kill them. Yi Shiwen and the others were all peerless emperor-level experts. Their vitality was even more powerful to an unimaginable extent. Even if they only released a little bit of it, it was like a beacon in this stormy sea region. It attracted countless powerful creatures from the outer region to attack them. This was the first time Yi Shiwen fought in the outer region. However, he was also secretly surprised by the ferocity of these creatures from the outer region. Emperor-level experts were not only supreme existences in the Fortune Divine Dynasty. Even in the outer region, those Emperor-level experts were also high and mighty. They ruled over a region of the world. Ordinary creatures would not dare to attack an Emperor-level expert, let alone a group of Emperor-level experts. It was not an exaggeration to describe these creatures from the outer region as daring. They were extremely arrogant. After a while, everyone was surrounded by endless storms. These storms were the nests of the creatures from the outer region. No one knew how many creatures from the outer region were being nurtured in these storms. They were so densely packed that they filled the sky. They rushed towards Yi Shiwen and the others like locusts, blotting out the sky and covering the earth. All sorts of tyrannical divine abilities erupted in an instant. Most of these alien creatures were ferocious beasts that did not fear death. However, there were also some intelligent creatures among them. Under the command of these intelligent alien creatures, the ferocious beasts erupted with formidable combat power. They instantly formed a towering formation, using the formation to resist and destroy the emperor monarchs. This was also the only way to defeat a sovereign emperor. If it was a sovereign emperor who had just become a sovereign emperor, it was possible that he would fail miserably and be killed by these foreign creatures. Then, his flesh and blood would be devoured completely. These ferocious beasts weren't afraid of death, and once they successfully devoured an imperial monarch, they would be able to forge an incomparably glorious race. An imperial monarch's entire body was a divine material of great nourishment, and it wasn't something that other treasures of heaven and earth could compare to. The first to rush over was a group of fierce beasts. These fierce beasts were jet black in color. They were dozens of feet long. The color of their bodies was almost the same as the color of the sea. They did not attack from the sky. Instead, they directly swooped up from the sea and rushed towards Yi Shiwen and the others. Their first attack was a magical power that combined water and wind attributes. One or two of these fierce beasts were nothing. However, the magical power formed by countless of these fierce beasts was enough to topple mountains and overturn seas. The strength of these fierce beasts was extremely powerful. Even a seasoned quasi-emperor wouldn't be able to withstand their first wave of attack. They would be completely annihilated. Everyone, spread out and kill these beasts. Although each of these beasts is not worth much, they can be sold for some price if they are added up. Oldkin said. These creatures from the outer region were essential materials for many people in the Fortune Divine Dynasty to refine pills and forge weapons. However, ordinary people had no way of hunting such fierce beasts. Therefore, the price of these materials from the bodies of these creatures was very high in the Fortune Divine Dynasty. However, this high price was only relative to those below the Emperor realm. For the Emperor realm, it was only considered not bad. Yi Shiwen also rushed forward when he heard this. The Tai Yu sword in his hand slashed out, forming the power of the Tai Yu sword. It swept out in all directions and tore apart everything. Over 1,000 fierce beasts were killed on the spot. The magical power formation that they had created was also torn apart by Yi Shiwen's Tai Yu sword. Without the protection of the formation, these people were just lambs waiting to be slaughtered. Most of them were killed in an instant. They instantly turned into a mist of blood that filled the sky. Yi Shiwen didn't intend to leave the corpses of these vicious birds intact. All the blood essence of their bodies had been absorbed by Yi Shiwen. Although this blood essence was better than nothing for an Emperor Realm expert, he might be able to extract a drop of useful blood essence from hundreds of them. However, for the current Yi Shiwen, it was naturally better than nothing. However, it was a pity that it would be much better if there was an Emperor Realm creature. No matter how many of these foreign creatures he killed, it would not be as useful as killing a supreme Emperor Realm creature. Yi Shiwen swept the Taiyu sword, and the others also unleashed their respective magical powers. Even if they were said to be not good at fighting, it was only when compared to those in the same realm. When it came to these ants below the sovereign Emperor Realm, they could absolutely sweep them away without any difficulty. More and more storms surrounded them, and the number of creatures from the outer realm increased as well. None of them had the intention to continue fighting. They all knew very well why they had come here. Therefore, they didn't need to be reminded to know that they had come here. They killed their way through the territory of the ominous sky-devouring python. Although these foreign creatures gathered more and more, they were not a match for Yi Shiwen and the others. They swept the way. Chapter 3046. Boom! Yi Shiwen was like a rampaging Tyrannosaurus rex, constantly killing in the sea. Although the ferocious beasts in the sea were tyrannical, they were no match for the attacks of several emperors. The further they went into the stormy sea area, the more ferocious beasts and creatures there were. These ferocious beasts didn't just attack the outsiders, they also attacked and killed each other for survival, to fight for territory, to fight for living space. It could be said that countless ferocious beasts died at every moment, and countless ferocious beasts were born. It was an exceptionally cruel scene. The ominous beasts that were hit by Yi Shiwen turned into blobs of blood on the spot. These blobs of blood attracted even more ominous beasts to spy on them. Yi Shiwen kept swinging the Taiyu sword in his hand, as if he would never tire. Elder Kan and the others couldn't help but be secretly startled as they saw Yi Shiwen's massacre. Yi Shiwen had been like a vanguard along the way. He had been killing nonstop. However, the speed of his flying light wasn't any slower than theirs. He had been killing nonstop while keeping up with their speed. Everyone was secretly startled by the level of his strength. In a day's time, these people had already gone many miles into the stormy sea region. They just kept killing. The deeper they went, the more tyrannical the ominous beasts became. In the beginning, there were only ominous beasts at the Dao confirmation level. Later on, even a random clan would have many quasi-emperor level experts. They could even faintly sense the aura of some emperor-level lifeforms in the depths of the void. However, it was obvious that these emperor-rank existences were wary of these people, not daring to make a move. After all, emperor-rank existences were not just fierce beasts, but also possessed astonishing intelligence. Moreover, among the emperor-rank existences, there were some who could abolish their cultivation and start from scratch. What they practiced were the Fortune Divine Dynasty's cultivators' martial techniques, comprehending the laws of the world, and achieving transcendence, achieving the goal of immortality. Among the emperor-level lifeforms, there were some old antiques that had lived for countless years. Although it was rare for them to strip off their cultivation and start from scratch, these emperor-level lifeforms had accumulated a lot over the years. The first thing the Fortune Divine Dynasty's experts would do upon encountering these emperor-rank creatures was to kill them. They absolutely could not be allowed to grow, otherwise, they would become a great threat to the Fortune Divine Dynasty. Everyone, we are now deep into the stormy sea region. When we make our move, try to make as little noise as possible. Start hiding your aura. Get ready. He had been to the stormy sea region more than once, so he was very clear about his current location. This was already a very deep place in the stormy sea region. The clans that could survive here were all super clans without exception. They possessed astonishing strength that ordinary people could not imagine. Otherwise, they would have been devoured by other clans long ago. Everyone nodded and worked together. It was no longer Yi Shiwen attacking alone. With several sovereign emperors working together, it was naturally very easy for them to hide their auras. Walla lala! At this time, incomparably powerful spatial storms had appeared in the sky. These storms seemed to have been blown out from the depths of space. They tore the space apart and wreaked havoc on the sea surface. Many fierce beasts couldn't react in time and were swept into these spatial storms. They were shredded to death on the spot. As for those powerful tribes, formations rose one after another in their ancestral lands to resist the sudden attacks of these spatial storms. The living environment here was many times harsher than the coastal areas. The clans that could survive here were all extremely tyrannical existences without exception. Naturally, they had many means to deal with these spatial storms. The arrangement of these spirit arrays was no doubt a little inferior to the masters of spirit arrays, but compared to ordinary people, it was much better. Moreover, everyone could feel the aura of some Emperor-level lifeforms from these array formations. Many clans had Emperor-level lifeforms in charge, or had Emperor-level lifeforms in charge in the past. Everyone looked dignified. However, it only took a while before Denda said, "The spatial storms here are too big. Spatial storms of this level aren't too big when we enter the water. I'm afraid they won't affect us in the water. I've seen a terrifying spatial storm once. It covered the sky and the earth. Even if you hid in the deep sea, you would be blown away by this kind of spatial storm and be completely shredded to death." Even though everyone was a sovereign emperor, they were still shocked when they heard about a spatial storm of this level. Almost in the next moment, everyone used the water-repelling art and rushed down. The moment Yi Shiwen entered the water, he discovered that this water was not ordinary water. It was hundreds of times heavier than ordinary water. It was not an environment that ordinary creatures could survive in. No wonder even the spatial storms couldn't blow it away. Those that could survive here were all extremely ferocious creatures without exception. However, this water didn't have any effect on these sovereign emperors. In fact, they were like fish in water when they used the water attribute laws. They flew all the way forward. In the water, there was no doubt that there were far fewer ferocious beasts, unlike on the surface of the sea, where ferocious beasts could be found almost everywhere. This was because it was much more difficult to survive here than on the surface of the sea. However, once there were living creatures, they were all very powerful. Even quasi-emperor level existences were not considered to be rare, and were almost very common. After flying for who knew how many miles, a huge world suddenly appeared in front of them. Yes, a huge world. It was so huge that the entire sea realm was separated from this world. And in this world there were giant pythons entrenched in this world. Each of them was hundreds of feet long, and some were even thousands of feet long. They looked like giant pythons, but they had a pair of wings on their ribs. Their entire bodies were surrounded by jet-black scales. When entrenched, they looked like small mountains. Their world was pitch black, and only some faint light could be seen. However, for many sovereign emperors, even the absence of light didn't affect their vision in the darkness. Yi Shiwen could feel from afar that countless laws were intertwining, forming a huge domain. It formed a huge canopy that covered the entire world. This was the fundamental reason why this world could exist. Ominous sky-devouring pythons. Kan Lao slowly uttered these 4 words. This was the ancestral land of the ominous sky-devouring pythons. Yi Shiwen frowned slightly. He could feel that these ominous sky-devouring pythons were very terrifying. An adult ominous sky-devouring python was almost comparable to the divine king realm. The strength of the best among them was probably no less than the quasi-emperor realm. This race was undoubtedly tyrannical to the extreme. It was no wonder that an invincible ancestor who was comparable to a 9th realm expert had appeared in this race. However, these emperor-level creatures didn't cultivate the laws and didn't ask about the heavenly Tao. No matter how powerful they were, they would eventually die. This was something that even ordinary deities among cultivators couldn't compare to. This could be considered as a kind of fairness of the heavenly Tao. Otherwise, this world wouldn't have been able to accommodate ordinary cultivators like them. Everyone, be careful. We must not alarm these ominous sky-devouring pythons if we go in now. Otherwise, this matter will be troublesome, especially if they become vigilant. Who knows how much more difficult it will be for us to succeed? Old Ginseng cautiously reminded everyone. Everyone nodded. They hadn't come here to launch an expedition against the ominous sky-devouring pythons this time. Instead, they had come to secretly seize the non-phase spirit bone left behind by the ancestor of the ominous sky-devouring python race. Nobody wanted to cause unnecessary trouble. They were only one step away. Nobody wanted to waste all their previous efforts. All right, let's go. All of you, come with me. An illusory and strange aura emerged from Lao Shen's body. Then, his entire body disappeared in front of everyone. If it weren't for the fact that everyone's divine senses had locked onto each other, they would have immediately disappeared. Everyone unleashed their magical powers and martial arts to conceal their auras. Then, they instantly disappeared into the sea. Even an emperor could deceive the heavenly Tao. So, it was only a matter of concealing some of their auras. Yi Shiwen waited until everyone had concealed themselves. Then, he opened his mouth and said, "Before we go, let me go and kill a few ominous sky-devouring pythons. Then, I'll search their souls to find out where their ancestral land is. This way, we won't run around like headless flies." Yes, Martial Emperor is right. Star Emperor and the others nodded. This was indeed the case. Even if Yi Shiwen hadn't mentioned this task, they would have done it themselves. Yi Shiwen flew into this world after he finished speaking. He had just entered this world, and he instantly felt that the world's principles seemed to be rejecting him. There were all kinds of densely packed world's principles that were completely different from the outside world's principles. Unless one was a heaven-devouring ominous python, one would be rejected here. This was also a means that had been arranged by the many old ancestors of the sky-devouring pythons. This was their home field. Outsiders would be weakened here. However, the sky-devouring pythons were the complete opposite. They were like fish in water. Yi Shiwen secretly nodded. This was indeed a means that only an emperor could use. It was a bit like the martial emperor heaven that he had established in the divine court. It also had the same effect. It could block the invasion of foreign enemies. This side of the world had obviously been strengthened by more than one emperor-class lifeform. However, when it came to the understanding of principles and arrays, these emperor-class lifeforms were often quite crude. This was because they usually didn't need to use them. As long as they used their innate divine abilities, they would be invincible. Yi Shiwen felt the existence of the world's laws. However, he didn't rush into it immediately. Instead, he began to comprehend it quietly. The mysterious space began to revolve crazily. It began to analyze the composition of this world. Chapter 3047. In front of Yi Shiwen's eyes, countless information poured into his mind like a monstrous torrent. The composition of the entire world soon appeared in Yi Shiwen's mind. It was simply a fantasy for a quasi-emperor to analyze the composition and principles of the laws of a world in a short period of time. However, it was achievable for Yi Shiwen because he was also an emperor and also stood in the same realm. Many things were nothing more than things that could be understood with a little bit of effort. It was not a particularly difficult thing to do. Moreover, with the help of the mysterious space, Yi Shiwen had already analyzed the many rules and principles of this man-made small world in a short period of time. For him, this was simply like a fish in water. This was not a meaningless thing. After analyzing this small world, Yi Shiwen would not be rejected by the entire small world and could freely enter and exit. Although Elder Can and the others could also conceal their auras and enter, they absolutely could not expose their auras. Once their auras were exposed, it would cause the world to reject them and would soon alarm those sky-devouring ominous pythons. Therefore, it was impossible for them to directly attack. It would not take long before the entire sky-devouring ominous python community was alarmed. However, Yi Shiwen would not do that. Even if he directly attacked, the laws of this small world would mistakenly think that he was attacking one of their own. Every one of these ominous pythons was fierce and tyrannical. It was very normal for them to directly kill each other if they did not agree with each other. When the others saw that Yi Shiwen did not directly enter, they were not in a hurry and just waited quietly. After Yi Shiwen completely understood the laws of the entire small world, Yi Shiwen directly rushed into the ancestral land of the ominous pythons. Yi Shiwen concealed his aura and went deep into the ancestral land of the ominous pythons. He could see at a glance that it was hard to tell how many ominous pythons were present in the entire world, and each ominous python was automatically entrenched in a divine country. The entire world seemed ordinary. However, it was hard to tell how many spaces it was in fact. Countless powerful restrictions were fluttering in the air. Each ominous python was in charge of its own territory. From time to time, ominous pythons could be seen returning from hunting outside. Each ominous python's body was entwined with a terrifying and fierce aura. This race was worthy of being called a race that could act like a tyrant in the stormy sea region. There were too many experts in this race. They were even more powerful than the average great sect. Yi Shiwen sneaked into the divine kingdom of a quasi-emperor-level ominous python on the spot without making a sound. The entire divine kingdom of the fierce python began to seethe the moment Yi Shiwen broke in. That several thousand feet long fierce python woke up with a start. It fiercely raised its mountain-sized head, and its eyes emitted a fierce radiance. Its fangs appeared in its mouth, and it opened its bloody mouth. It seemed as if it wanted to swallow the entire world. Who are you? How dare you intrude into my kingdom? At this time, the sky-devouring ominous python had already determined that someone had intruded into its divine kingdom, but it couldn't tell who it was. Yi Shiwen's figure emerged. The Taiyu sword suddenly appeared and chopped down. Whoosh! A terrifying sword chi swept out, as if it was going to pierce through the entire divine kingdom. The terrifying body of that several thousand feet long fierce python was almost immediately split into two halves from head to tail under this sword. His entire body was scorched by the Emperor Lord's law, burning fiercely and turning into ashes. His spirit was also severely injured. He wanted to escape, but Yi Shiwen grabbed him and extracted a part of his memories. Under Yi Shiwen's means, it was impossible for him to escape even if he wanted to. Suddenly, Yi Shiwen understood many things about this fierce python. This was also the reason why Yi Shiwen didn't look for an ordinary fierce python. Its level was too low and it didn't know much. However, there were too many trivial memories in the memories of this ominous python. Only a few of them were useful to Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen also understood the direction of the tomb of the fierce python clan at this time. The phaseless spirit bone they were looking for was in it. Just when Yi Shiwen planned to return and tell everyone the direction of the tomb, suddenly, a loud roar came from the ancestral land of the fierce python. This roar directly startled the many powerful sky-devouring pythons that were sleeping in this world. Damn it! Not good. Someone has alarmed the ominous sky-devouring python. Elder Can immediately felt waves of terrifying intent sweeping through this world. In that case, there's no other way. We can't gather together. Let's all spread out and find a way to sneak into their tomb. Let's do it separately. This way, the chances of success will be much higher. Once we succeed, we'll immediately return to Storm City. Denda made a prompt decision. They looked at each other and immediately turned into streams of light. They rushed into the ancestral land of the fierce python from different directions. Although they didn't want to alarm the emperor-level existence of the fierce python, it didn't mean that they were afraid. After all, they were all emperor-level characters who dominated a region. They just didn't want to cause unnecessary trouble. However, since someone had already alarmed these powerful fierce pythons, there was no other way. They could only kill their way in. Yi Shiwen narrowed his eyes. A few doubts flashed in his mind. Naturally, this couldn't be caused by him. His attack was straightforward and neat. There was no oversight at all. However, he couldn't care so much at this time. Since he had been discovered, he had to kill his way in. An incomparably powerful ominous python jumped out of its divine kingdom, and discovered Yi Shiwen's existence one after another. These fierce pythons were like arrows that had left the bow. They directly pounced towards Yi Shiwen to kill him. All of you die. Yi Shiwen took a step forward. The Taiyu sword in his hand turned into thousands of sword auras. They directly slashed towards these fierce pythons. Puchi! 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 Yi Shiwen's sword chi directly pierced through these ominous sky-devouring pythons, killing them on the spot. In a situation where Yi Shiwen did not hold back, these ominous sky-devouring pythons were only divine kings, at most quasi-emperors. How could they be his opponents? They were instantly killed. Roar! The fierce pythons that appeared later also suddenly realized that the person in front of them was difficult to deal with. They didn't directly rush up to kill him. On the contrary, they divided themselves into different positions. Then, the formation between heaven and earth seemed to be affected by some kind of power. It instantly took shape. Boom! The moment this formation took shape, a terrible power rushed into the sky. Then, it turned into a terrible energy torrent and blasted in Yi Shiwen's direction. It was actually an Emperor Lord level attack. This place was worthy of being the nest of the fierce pythons. Emperor Lord level formation could be activated at any time. Even for Emperor Lords, it was a certain threat. However, compared to Yi Shiwen, it was still far inferior. These fierce pythons thought that they could use this formation to kill Yi Shiwen. After all, in the past, there were other Emperor-level creatures who dared to spy on their ancestral land. However, as long as these Emperor-Lord-level formation took action, they could be killed. This was probably the extent of the so-called foundation. This was something that rising forces without any foundation could not be compared to. The fierce faces of the fierce pythons revealed a bit of a grin. Then, they only saw that every pore on Yi Shiwen's body was spewing out sword aura. These sword auras formed a terrifying long river of swordsmanship above Yi Shiwen's head. This long river of swordsmanship instantly slashed towards the formation above his head. Boom! The long river of swordsmanship and the energy torrent blasted out by the formation bombarded together. In an instant, the world rumbled and trembled as if it was about to shatter. Both sides were in a stalemate. However, this stalemate only lasted for a moment. The energy of the formation couldn't even withstand a blow from the long river of swordsmanship. It completely collapsed. Then, the long river of swordsmanship directly broke the entire formation. Boom! The entire formation exploded in an instant. The backlash of the formation's collapse was instantly pushed back. Boom! 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 These fierce pythons, who were grinning just now, exploded on the spot. Their spirit was also destroyed under the backlash. The backlash of an Emperor Lord level formation was naturally at the Emperor Lord level. They were directly blasted into pieces on the spot. This is big trouble. I must find the cemetery before the battle erupts completely. Yi Shiwen frowned slightly and said to himself. In the memory of the sky-devouring python that he had killed, there was a rough location of the tomb. However, there was no specific location. That was because the sky-devouring python would only go to the tomb when it was old and waiting for death. Before that, it would not even consider going there. Perhaps only an Emperor-class sky-devouring python would know the specific location. Various fighting and explosions sounded in the distance. The others had also directly collided with the fierce pythons. They were different from Yi Shiwen. They were rejected by the rules of this world. In this world, they were like guiding lights, directly attracting the fierce pythons. In particular, Yi Shiwen clearly felt that there was the aura of the Emperor-level fierce pythons rushing over there. Yi Shiwen quickly made a judgment. They might be able to defeat the Emperor-level fierce python. However, it would be very difficult to kill them in a short time. Moreover, the power of the Emperor-level fierce python would be stimulated with the passage of time. Therefore, it would be more difficult to succeed. At this time, they could no longer rely on him. He could only rely on himself. This thought flashed through his mind. Yi Shiwen stepped on the escape light and flew towards the depths of the ancestral land of the fierce pythons. Chapter 30-48. Along the way, Yi Shiwen encountered sky-devouring ominous pythons that bumped into him from time to time. They were all awakened in the depths of the ancestral land and rushed to various places as reinforcements. Yi Shiwen concealed his aura, which allowed him to move around in this small world like a sky-devouring ominous python without being repelled. However, if he bumped into them head-on, a great battle would inevitably break out. However, these sky-devouring ominous pythons could not even stop Yi Shiwen from moving forward. In just a moment they were all killed. Suddenly, Yi Shiwen killed all the way and finally arrived at the depths of the ancestral land of the sky-devouring ominous python. He saw that the sky was blooming with rays of light, and there was endless vitality surging, as if it was about to materialize. Where the dragon vein is. Yi Shiwen immediately opened his eyes and suddenly remembered that there was a memory of this dragon vein in the previous sky-devouring ominous python's memory. This was the core of the entire ancestral land of the sky-devouring ominous python. This dragon vein could not only condense great luck, but it was also a collection of endless energy. The sky-devouring ominous python's development to become an overlord of the stormy sea area was not unrelated to the location of this dragon vein. This was also the most important place in the sky-devouring ominous python clan. Usually, there would be an emperor-level sky-devouring ominous python guarding it. Therefore, Yi Shiwen had never thought of taking this dragon vein from the beginning. When he fought with an emperor-level creature, regardless of victory or defeat, it could not be settled immediately. It was not like quasi-emperors, where he could kill a bunch of them with one sword strike. At that time, it would inevitably alarm the entire sky-devouring ominous python clan and cause unnecessary trouble. However, it did not matter now. Anyway, it had already been alarmed. Moreover, the most important thing was that Yi Shiwen sensed that an emperor-level sky-devouring ominous python had already left this place and was rushing to other places to provide support. Obviously, the other battlefronts were in a tight situation. After all, Old Khan and the others were experts of the Emperor-Lord level. It was no wonder that the entire sky-devouring ominous python clan was alarmed when a few experts of the Emperor-Lord level barged in at once. Generally, only when two Overlord-level forces were in conflict would there be so many Emperor-level existences fighting. If this sky-devouring ominous python was guarding here, it would be impossible for Yi Shiwen to seize the dragon vein. This sky-devouring ominous python's ferocious aura was not inferior to his. It was impossible to deal with it in a short time. At that time, it would attract other Emperor-level ominous pythons. Now is the time. Yi Shiwen's heart was slightly moved, and his figure quickly jumped in. Suddenly, he felt an inexhaustible amount of yuan qi blowing against his face. This dragon's vein was indeed huge. It was unknown how many dragon's veins had gathered to form this dragon's vein. It was enough to build a powerful sect. Even Yi Shiwen hadn't found such a huge dragon's vein in the heavens and 10,000 worlds. Normally, even the members of the ominous python clan weren't allowed to approach this dragon's vein without permission. Yi Shiwen rushed all the way to the core area of the dragon's vein. This dragon's vein had already been refined by the fierce python clan. Any other clan that entered this place would immediately trigger a backlash. Almost at the moment when Yi Shiwen rushed in, a huge fierce dragon appeared from the depths of the dragon vein. It had a sinister look on its face as it bared its fangs and brandished its claws towards Yi Shiwen. Although this dragon vein had no intelligence, divine objects did. Moreover, it was such a heaven-defying divine object, so it immediately retaliated. Even an ordinary emperor would be severely injured by this terrifying power. However, this was nothing to Yi Shiwen. "Freeze!" Yi Shiwen shouted loudly. This vicious dragon was almost immediately fixed in place. Its huge body was constantly struggling in the water, and stirred up endless waves. However, it was unable to break free from the restraints of Yi Shiwen. "It's just a dragon's vein," Yi Shiwen sneered. He suddenly transformed into a monstrous big hand, and rushed towards that fierce dragon to grab it. This fierce dragon was immediately caught by him, and began to be refined in his hand. Roar! This dragon's spirit constantly roared, and struggled. Its painful howls shook the entire sea. The entire dragon's vein was shaking because of the dragon's spirit's pain. This dragon's spirit gradually became smaller under Yi Shiwen's giant hand. It was refined by Yi Shiwen. All the pores on Yi Shiwen's body opened up, and countless spiritual energy in the dragon's vein was absorbed by him. It almost formed a terrifying storm, with him as the center, and began to crazily pour into his body. Yi Shiwen's cultivation was rising at an astonishing speed. With the dragon's spirit in Yi Shiwen's hand, it could not stop Yi Shiwen from absorbing the spiritual energy in the dragon's vein. If it was hiding in the depths of the dragon's vein, it would not be so easy for Yi Shiwen to find it. However, it rushed out immediately and was caught by Yi Shiwen. The dragon's spirit was a spiritual object that was automatically born in the dragon's vein. It was also the essence of the entire dragon's vein. There were countless places in the world with abundant spiritual energy, but not every place could form a dragon's vein, not to mention on such a scale. A dragon's vein that could be built into a large sect could not be formed under normal circumstances. Only when the dragon's spirit was born could it form a dragon's vein of such a scale. This was the same whether it was in the heavens or the fortune world. Once the dragon's spirit died, the entire dragon's vein would slowly wither. It could be said that it was born because of the dragon's spirit, and it would also die because of the dragon's spirit. One could imagine how important the dragon's spirit was to the dragon's vein. Now that it was in Yi Shiwen's hand, it could not struggle at all. It could only watch Yi Shiwen crazily absorb the spiritual energy of the dragon's vein. Even the ferocious heaven-devouring ominous python would not absorb the spiritual energy in the dragon's vein so fiercely because it had to pay attention to the long-term flow. However, Yi Shiwen did not care so much. To him, this was a one-time deal. If he wanted to break in again, it would not be so easy. Yi Shiwen sat in the depths of the dragon's vein, refining the dragon's spirit while absorbing the spiritual energy in the dragon's vein. In his body, the mysterious space was operating crazily, absorbing the spiritual energy in the dragon's vein crazily while deducing the heavenly laws of the fourth and fifth realms. Yi Shiwen did not have that much wealth on him to carry out such large-scale deductions, but now he could do it. If an emperor saw Yi Shiwen like this, they would be scared immediately. Yi Shiwen was absorbing the spiritual energy in the dragon's vein while his cultivation was increasing crazily. His cultivation had just reached the fourth realm, but now it was completely stabilized in a short period of time. Even if an ordinary person had such a dragon's vein, they could only absorb it slowly. Not all the spiritual energy absorbed could be transformed into cultivation power. The bottleneck of the realm stopped everyone's speed of absorbing spiritual energy. Everyone could only absorb the spirit energies in accordance with their current realm and skill. However, Yi Shiwen was different. He was absorbing the spirit energy while operating the mysterious space at the same time. Therefore, his realm and perception were also improving at an astonishing speed every moment. Therefore, He could continuously absorb the spiritual energy because his realm was also increasing, and his upper limit was increasing at every moment. He was like a chaotic beast that could never be satisfied. The more spiritual energy he absorbed, the more tyrannical he became. The more tyrannical he was, the more spiritual energy he absorbed. This was almost a process of complementing each other, allowing him to constantly improve at a stunning speed. As his skill became stronger and stronger, the spirit energy storm surrounding his body also became bigger and bigger. Many heaven-devouring ominous pythons noticed the changes on this side and quickly rushed over. However, they were all sucked into the storm almost in an instant. They were completely strangled into blood foam and were absorbed together with the storm. There was no difference at all. They couldn't even stop Yi Shiwen for a little bit. The entire dragon's vein was declining at a speed visible to the naked eye. The place around the dragon's vein, which was originally full of vitality, began to become desolate and miserable. These dragon's veins were violently turned into his own cultivation power by Yi Shiwen. Anyway, it was not his, so he did not feel bad at all. Yi Shiwen's cultivation was also constantly growing. Originally, his cultivation might have improved in 100 years, but now it was almost at a speed that he could perceive. Roar! Above Yi Shiwen, after the dragon's vein spirit roared for the last time, it finally stopped struggling. The entire dragon's vein spirit was refined by Yi Shiwen and turned into endless pure power that poured into Yi Shiwen's body. Boom! Every pore in Yi Shiwen's body opened, crazily absorbing. His cultivation power increased a lot, directly rushing towards the peak of the fourth realm. This was the dragon's vein spirit, the most essential part of the entire dragon's vein, equivalent to a small half of the dragon's vein. One must know that he had just cultivated to the fourth realm for a short period of time. Under normal circumstances, it would take at least tens of thousands of years, or at most hundreds of thousands of years to be able to advance. However, he did not even use 100 years to touch the edge of the peak of the fourth realm. One could imagine how huge this dragon's vein was. It saved him countless years of time. Although there was a change in the matter of obtaining the non-phase spirit bone this time, it was a blessing in disguise. If not for this change, how could he have obtained the dragon's vein of the sky-devouring ominous python clan? Roar! At this moment, a terrifying aura swept out, and a huge figure, like a huge mountain, crushed down. The emperor-level sky-devouring ominous python appeared. The incident here had finally alarmed the emperor-level sky-devouring ominous python. He had just returned, and immediately saw the destruction of the dragon's vein. Suddenly, his whole body trembled, and a fierce aura rushed to the stars. The endless sea trembled because of his anger. At this moment, he was like a tyrant in the water, crushing everything. Roar! That sky-devouring ominous python, which was much bigger than the ordinary sky-devouring ominous python, suddenly opened its bloody mouth and bit towards Yi Shiwen, who was deep in the dragon's vein. At this critical moment, Yi Shiwen suddenly opened his eyes, and the aura on his body was released to the extreme. The peak of the fourth realm. Chapter 3049. After a crazy devouring, Yi Shiwen finally rushed to the peak of the fourth realm. This was the first time he had improved his martial power so violently after becoming an emperor. He had no scruples and was unscrupulous. The disadvantage of doing this was that he had destroyed the dragon vein in one go. The advantage was that he had rushed to the peak of the fourth realm in a short time. Moreover, there was no trace of reluctance. The mysterious space was crazily deducing many mysteries of the fourth realm and the heaven way for him, so he did not force himself at all. Even the speed of his comprehension was faster than the speed of his absorption of the spiritual energy. Even with the improvement of his realm and martial power, it was like a hot knife through butter. There was no obstacle at all, and he just crushed it. He finally advanced to the peak of the fourth realm. Although it was still the fourth realm, he could feel that the power in his body had improved by more than a little. That emperor-level sky-devouring ominous python opened its mouth wide and bit towards Yishiwen. This was a kind of magical ability, devouring the heavens and earth. This was also the origin of the name of the sky-devouring ominous python. This was an innate magical ability. An emperor-level sky-devouring ominous python could swallow a world in one bite without any pressure. An ordinary sky-devouring ominous python was already very terrifying, let alone an emperor-level sky-devouring ominous python. Yishiwen opened his eyes, and it seemed as if he had brought light to the entire world. Every pore on his body was spurting out sword ki, and it condensed into a huge sword above his head. This sword fiercely chopped down towards the ominous python. Boom! The sword light directly collided with the sky-devouring ominous python's attack. In an instant it caused the endless void to collapse. Even this small world couldn't withstand such a level of battle. It showed signs of breaking apart, and there were actually cracks appearing. The sky-devouring ominous python was sent flying on the spot. A look of disbelief and astonishment flashed in its eyes. He had always been guarding the spirit vein, so his cultivation had improved very quickly. In just a few million years, he had already reached the fourth realm. He had originally seen the fierce battle outside and wanted to go and help, but who knew that someone would take advantage of the chaos to attack the spirit vein of the ominous Python clan. This was practically digging up the foundation of their clan, so he immediately rushed back. When he returned, he saw the devastation. The anger in his heart suddenly broke through the sky, but after a fight, he found that this person was not ordinary. An emperor-level creature that grew up in an extremely fierce environment like the stormy sea area could be said to have rich combat experience, and at the same time, an extremely tyrannical character. The fourth realm. Moreover, it was an experienced emperor-level creature of the fourth realm. In terms of fierceness, it was almost no less than the previous Yishiwen. If he had just been promoted to the fourth realm, it might have taken a lot of effort to deal with it. However, now, he was already at the peak of the fourth realm. Compared to before, his strength was not as simple as just a little bit stronger. I must finish this quickly. I can't let you live. A cold light flashed in Yishiwen's eyes. In an instant, he moved. The demon wings behind him suddenly spread open, like clouds hanging in the sky. In a flash, he had already rushed in front of the fierce python. Roar! This fierce python was also extremely fierce. It looked up to the sky and roared. Countless surrounding laws were shaken out from its body, and the surrounding seawater instantly turned into poisonous water. This was a type of highly toxic law. In an instant, the law completely turned the surrounding seawater into poisonous water. Even if a sovereign emperor came into contact with it, it would be very troublesome, let alone a quasi-emperor. If they came into contact with it, they would be completely corroded in an instant. Countless poisonous water shot out like water arrows, like countless meteor showers, directly piercing through the space and shooting towards Yishiwen. This sky-devouring python cultivated a highly toxic ability, and it had clearly cultivated it to an extremely high level. It could control laws with its ability, and this was the fundamental reason why its true combat power was comparable to that of an imperial monarch. Otherwise, under normal circumstances, creatures that had not attained the Tao would not be able to fight back at all when facing an imperial monarch who had attained the Tao. However, these emperor-level creatures were obviously different. Do you think a mere highly toxic magical power can do anything to me? Yishiwen did not move. The Taiyu sword appeared in his hand, and for a few years, countless figures were scattered in the sky. Each figure was holding a Taiyu sword, and they slashed at the highly toxic water arrows. Bang! 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 In an instant, all kinds of highly toxic water arrows were smashed by the sword light on the spot, and once again turned into highly toxic seawater, merging into the surrounding sea. Many fierce pythons that had just approached were contaminated by this highly toxic seawater, and were corroded in an instant. In an environment like the sea, the power of this highly toxic magical power could be maximized. It was no wonder that the fierce python could eventually become an overlord. However, Yi Shiwen's counterattack had just begun. The countless figures that Yi Shiwen had transformed into instantly fused together into a single figure. Then, with an unparalleled momentum and terrifying power, it chopped down towards Yi Shiwen. In an instant, the world shook violently. After Yi Shiwen had been promoted to the peak of the fourth realm, this was the first time that he had completely released his power like this. In the face of this sword that seemed to be able to sever the heavens and earth, the sky-devouring ominous python roared repeatedly and released its most powerful divine ability. Not only did it release the highly toxic divine ability, it also released the sky-devouring ominous python's divine ability in an instant. All of a sudden, thousands of images appeared in the sky. In each image, the sky-devouring ominous serpent was howling and roaring madly, unleashing a divine ability. There were also many other divine abilities hidden in its bloodline. At this moment, all of them were completely unleashed. Boom! However, this kind of grand scene of thousands of magical powers being released only lasted for a short period of time. As Yi Shiwen's sword light slashed down, these thousands of images that bloomed, all collapsed in an instant. It was as if countless worlds had collapsed in front of it. Under Yi Shiwen's sword, all the worlds collapsed and could not be maintained. Yi Shiwen's sword light did not slow down, and broke everything like a hot knife through butter. This fierce python could not stop it at all, and burst out thousands of magical powers, but there was no change. Bang! The sword light fiercely slashed on the body of the fierce python. In an instant, it seemed as if two worlds had collided together, and the endless space was completely annihilated in this collision. Bang! A loud sound was heard, and the fierce python groaned. Its entire huge body was sent flying by Yi Shiwen's sword attack. A huge crack appeared on the forehead of the ominous sky-devouring python. A huge crack had appeared on its body, which was comparable to the toughest metal in the world. Blood flowed out continuously. The scene was quite horrifying. Roar! This fierce python continued to roar, and its roar shook the world. Yi Shiwen's attack failed to behead it. After all, it was also an extremely tyrannical expert of the fourth realm of Emperor level. If it was only a creature of the first realm, then it would have been severely injured by Yi Shiwen's sword attack, and would no longer be a match for Yi Shiwen. Die! This ominous python opened its big mouth, and let out a terrifying roar. A terrifying syllable came out of its huge mouth, and suddenly rushed towards Yi Shiwen to kill him. Even the space couldn't accommodate its huge body, and it unexpectedly smashed the space, and just like that, it rushed towards Yi Shiwen. At this time, Yi Shiwen laughed out loud, and he was not angry. You came at the right time, and be my stepping stone. Just in time to test my current power. Yi Shiwen's whole body was shining, and an immortal light emerged from his golden body. His chi and blood were incomparably majestic, as if he was the most powerful Asura in the world. He took a step forward, and his aura rose at an astonishing speed. Behind him, there was a faint world manifesting, and it was unknown how many gods were sitting in this world, chanting ancient sutras. Yi Shiwen's black hair fluttered in the wind, and he was ostentatious and overbearing. This time, he did not even use the Taiyu sword, and only blasted a simple punch. Bang! This punch shook the entire universe, and it blasted towards the Emperor-level fierce python. Bang! This punch blasted out, and the world trembled violently. This punch directly blasted in front of the fierce python, and at this moment, the heaven and earth devouring magical power contained in the huge mouth of the fierce python was bombarded into pieces by Yi Shiwen's punch. Blood instantly burst out, and scales mixed with bone fragments flew everywhere. After being hit by Yi Shiwen's punch, the fierce python was immediately seriously injured, and its entire head directly exploded. In the next moment, the sky-devouring ominous python's head regrew. His expression was ferocious and cruel, and his blood was flowing in the surrounding seawater, which was full of poison, and his snow-white fangs looked incomparably awe-inspiring. "Kill!" In his huge mouth, a terrifying syllable burst out, and a terrible aura erupted from his body, and the terrible power of an emperor-level creature completely spread out at this moment. At this moment, he no longer had any reservations. He had already seen that the figure in front of him was a peerless enemy, and if he did not kill him, then he would be in big trouble. At this moment, all the surrounding seawater was completely under his control, and it began to seal Yi Shiwen. "It's no use for you to sublimate at this time." Yi Shiwen let out a loud roar. Then, he tore apart the magical power that the fierce python had used to imprison him on the spot. Chapter 30-50. The sky-devouring ominous python's magical power was torn apart by Yi Shiwen's hands. At this time, Yi Shiwen's aura was increasing every minute and second. As time passed, Yi Shiwen's mastery of his skyrocketing strength increased more and more, and his combat effectiveness also became stronger. The endless surrounding seawater began to tremble violently under Yi Shiwen's boundless magic power, and then instantly evaporated. Roar! The sky-devouring ominous python was already at this stage, so how could it admit defeat so easily? The scales all over its body stood up, and its mountain-like eyes suddenly opened. Circles of ripples spread out in all directions. This was a kind of magical power. It exploded in an instant, and the terrifying power absorbed from the void rushed towards Yi Shiwen. "Kill!" Yi Shiwen also let out a loud roar. However, he only let out a single roar. His aura became even more berserk. The martial emperor's seal above his head began to spin, sweeping out 3,000 martial arts. It was as if the world had been reshaped at this moment. The flow of all the laws was clearly visible. Boom! The martial emperor's seal directly fell, and it seemed as if the whole world was falling along with it. An unparalleled attack fell on the spot. Originally, Yi Shiwen wanted to keep some trump cards in the fortune realm, and he didn't intend to use some of his past techniques easily. He only planned to use the Tai Yu sword to defeat most of his opponents. But now he couldn't care so much. If he wanted to get rid of this sky-devouring ominous python in a short time, he must use all his combat effectiveness. A long delay could lead to unexpected changes. The sky-devouring ominous python's various magical powers exploded in an instant and turned into the most terrifying golden fragments. They rolled back, and many of them directly hit the body of the ominous python. The martial emperor's seal was Yi Shiwen's strongest technique, and also his original martial arts. Once it was used, it was naturally invincible, and it broke the sky-devouring ominous python's attack completely. The huge body of the ominous python was also constantly twisting, and the martial emperor's seal in the distance continued to fall, crushing the sky and suppressing all directions. A trace of shock flashed through the python's eyes. Although he was brutal, he was not without intelligence. He had never seen such a fierce and invincible opponent in the same realm. Even the tribes that had fought with the python for territory for many years had never seen such a fierce and invincible opponent. He had many tricks up his sleeves, and his physical body was extremely strong. He was actually able to severely injure him with a single punch. Yi Shiwen seemed to be the center of the world. He was the only celestial emperor in this world. Everything must be used by him. Die! The sky-devouring ominous serpent opened his mouth wide, and countless spirit chi surged into his mouth. His entire body had completely transformed into a Taoist form at this moment. However, it was an ugly man dressed in black scales. It was the Taoist form that he had transformed into. A pitch-black long whip appeared in his hand. He brandished it and slashed it towards Yi Shiwen's martial emperor seal. The long whip in his hand was not a Tao artifact, but in reality, its power was no less than that of a Tao artifact. This was because it did not contain the great Tao laws necessary for a Tao artifact. However, it was refined from the transformation of his tail. If they really fought, its power was no less than that of a Tao artifact. Boom! This long whip directly collided with the martial emperor seal. Both sides were already emperor-level weapons, and they erupted with extreme power. The entire area of the dragon vein began to collapse. Inch by inch, the mountain collapsed in the seawater. Without the dragon vein spirit, the entire dragon vein had lost its vitality. There was no way to resist the sudden attack of such a level of power. Yi Shiwen held the martial emperor seal in his hand and stretched out his body. His entire body was surging with a terrifying aura. The golden aura swept in all directions. His body was indomitable, like the legendary Pangu who split the heavens and the earth. He supported the heavens and the earth, and wanted to create a mythical domain with his own strength. Countless martial Tao laws bloomed with a dazzling brilliance, and a powerful aura flowed around him. Die! The emperor-level sky-devouring ominous python shouted. His black hair all stood up, and his eyes were wide open as if they were about to split open. He had already seen through Yi Shiwen's ferocity. Such a person must not be left alone. Not to mention that he had destroyed the dragon vein and destroyed the foundation of the sky-devouring ominous python race. This was simply a heinous crime, and he must not be let off. However, after fighting for so long, he also knew that it was not possible to deal with this person in front of him by himself. The only way was to delay until the others came to support him, and then kill him. The more he thought about it, the more aggrieved he felt. They were the dignified overlords of the outer domain, and now they had suffered a great loss here. It was simply a great humiliation. Whoosh! The long whip in the hand of this sky-devouring ominous python was like a mountain, and it slashed towards Yi Shiwen. His counterattack was fast and ruthless, and he used offense as defense. He must kill Yi Shiwen. However, completely different from him, Yi Shiwen did not have that much time to waste, let alone delay until the other emperor-level experts came to support him. Get lost! Yi Shiwen shouted loudly. An astonishing killing intention was brewing in his eyes. His aura had become even more berserk. It seemed that it was impossible to repel this fierce python. He could see that this python was determined to delay him even if it had to die. That being the case, he had no choice but to kill it completely. The magic power in his body was raised to the extreme, and his vitality was stimulated to the highest point. His whole body was wrapped in golden vitality, and it seemed as if he was cast in gold. This golden vitality directly transformed into various Taoist characters, and entangled his body like an ancient scripture. Martial Emperor Seal. The martial emperor seal in Yi Shiwen's hand grew bigger and bigger, and completely integrated with his martial art. Then, it directly smashed towards that long whip. Bang! A terrifying collision sound was heard, and the entire sea area turned into stormy waves. Normally, it was very difficult to set off such stormy waves in the deep sea area. After all, it was different from the surface of the sea. However, this collision had formed a terrifying collision, and it had swept in all directions. It had annihilated countless ominous pythons in an instant. An even more shocking scene took place. That incomparably hard long whip began to show dense cracks, and these cracks spread from the point of collision to the whole body. How is this possible? Even though the sky-devouring python was experienced and knowledgeable, it was still frightened at this moment. His long whip was comparable to a Tao tool. Even if an Emperor-level creature was caught off guard, it would still be severely injured in an instant. There was no other possibility. However, this person in front of him had actually shattered his weapon inch by inch with just one strike. Again? However, Yi Shiwen did not give it time to think. He roared on the spot and rushed forward again. The martial Emperor's seal grew bigger and bigger in Yi Shiwen's hand, and once again smashed down. Bang! 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 Yi Shiwen's offensive did not stop. The ominous python had no choice but to use the long whip in its hand to meet the enemy. It was constantly being smashed by the martial Emperor's seal. Boom! Suddenly, a huge explosion sound was heard. The long whip that was constantly being damaged exploded in an instant. Countless fragments of the long whip turned into black light and rolled back, and directly pierced the strong body of the ominous python. Blood splashed out, and even some bones were directly smashed. This magic tool was comparable to a Taoist tool, but it was smashed by Yi Shiwen at this moment. The difference in quality between the two sides was too big. Stubborn. You had the opportunity to escape before. Do you still want to escape now? Yi Shiwen shouted loudly. He held the martial Emperor's seal in his hand, and his whole body broke free. His hair fluttered in the wind, and he turned into a green figure, and attacked the ominous python. The ominous python looked up to the sky and roared again and again. Its whole body was bathed in black light, like a black iron god of war. Although it did not have a long whip, the fierce blood in its bones completely broke out at this moment. It did not have the slightest fear. On the contrary, it pounced towards Yi Shiwen, and confronted Yi Shiwen head-on. For Yi Shiwen, this was also what he wanted. In terms of physical strength, he was not afraid at all in the same realm. 6 paths of reincarnation, send you to hell. Behind Yi Shiwen, the 6 paths of reincarnation evolved, and it constantly rotated, spewing out the power of the 6 paths, suppressing everything in the world. All the creatures that belonged to the 6 paths of reincarnation would be affected by this set of fist technique. Bang! The two sides directly collided, and the two fists collided. The ominous python's fist suddenly spattered with blood. Although it had the protection of the black scale clothes, and its physical body itself was tyrannical and unparalleled, it was obviously far from enough to be compared with Yi Shiwen. It could even be said that the difference was too big, and it was not Yi Shiwen's opponent at all. This blow had determined who was superior. The traces of the Great Way on the ominous python's fist, and the magical power covering it, were all obliterated under the bombardment of Yi Shiwen's golden vitality. Again, Yi Shiwen laughed heartily and continued to attack. Even the body of this ominous python, which was very proud of, couldn't withstand a single blow from Yi Shiwen's continuous attacks. The scales on its body had also completely shattered under the continuous attack. It couldn't even withstand a single blow. The fragments flew in all directions, and it was unknown how many of its kind had been killed by Yi Shiwen. Boom! With another punch, Yi Shiwen and the ominous python's fist collided, and then only a loud bang was heard. The ominous python's arm was directly smashed into blood fog by Yi Shiwen. There was a flash of panic in its expression, and it completely recognized the fierceness of the person in front of it. It retreated again and again, trying to open up a distance. If it continued like this, it would only be beaten to death. However, at this time, it was simply too late. Yi Shiwen took a step forward and blasted in front of it, and a punch penetrated its chest. Blood burst and bone fragments swirled. Chapter 30:51. The golden fist was like the sharpest weapon, and it instantly pierced through the chest of the Emperor-level sky-devouring ominous python. In an instant, this Emperor-level sky-devouring ominous python transformed into its original body. Its huge body immediately filled the space, and blood sprayed out like a mountain torrent, dyeing the surrounding seawater completely golden. This emperor-level sky-devouring ominous python's body was still twitching slightly, but it was already dead. Its spirit had been completely shattered by Yi Shiwen's punch. It was completely killed by Yi Shiwen in one blow. And all of this took a long time to describe, but in fact, only a short period of time had passed. A fourth realm emperor-level sky-devouring ominous python had died in Yi Shiwen's hands. It was not a match for him at all. After killing this emperor-level sky-devouring ominous python, Yi Shiwen conveniently took the body of this emperor-level sky-devouring ominous python into his bag. The body of an emperor-level creature was simply priceless. It could be sold for a very high price, and even emperor lords would be tempted. Then, Yi Shiwen opened his hand and grabbed the rest of the dragon vein. Although the dragon vein was technically dead without the spirit of the dragon vein, so it was impossible to continue to nourish and strengthen the dragon vein, the remaining part of the dragon vein was still valuable. Yi Shiwen wanted to absorb the remaining parts of this dragon vein so that he could use it when he advanced to the fifth realm. Originally, he felt that all of this was still very far away. Even the peak of the fourth realm already required a very long time to reach the level. Even if he had the elixir that Dan Emperor mentioned, he should not be able to use it in a short period of time. However, now that he had devoured more than half of the dragon vein, his martial strength had risen to the peak of the fourth realm, which was many years ahead of his original plan. He had to prepare in advance even if he had not originally prepared. With this dragon vein and the elixir, it was enough to send him to the fifth realm in one fell swoop. This dragon's vein was naturally extremely important to him. Rumble! A series of rumbling sounds exploded in the void. In the distance, various emperor-level emperor lords were constantly fighting, and all kinds of laws and ripples were constantly rolling out. Intense battles were happening at every moment. Moreover, they were all in different directions because Elder Can and the others were breaking in from different directions. With their cultivation, unless they encountered an emperor-level creature, it was impossible to stop them. Yi Shiwen even felt a terrifying aura raging. There were also peerless experts in the sky-devouring ominous python clan, so even Elder Can and the others were not willing to break in directly. Now, such a scene was just to provide cover. It was naturally for the best if someone could break in and seize the formless spirit bone. After Yi Shiwen broke in, he did not know how many sky-devouring ominous python clan members he had encountered. Along the way, Yi Shiwen did not know how many sky-devouring ominous python clan members he had. Yi Shiwen rushed all the way. He didn't know how many members of the heaven-devouring ominous python clan had come across on the way. More and more heaven-devouring ominous pythons had been awakened from their slumber as the battle had become more and more intense. These sky-devouring ominous pythons that had not even reached the emperor level couldn't stop Yi Shiwen at all. As long as they came into contact with Yi Shiwen's qi and blood, they would be burned into ashes. Yi Shiwen killed along the way, and it did not take long for him to reach the sky-devouring ominous python clan's graveyard. The laws here were completely different from those in other places. One sky-devouring ominous python after another was flying in the sky. Obviously, the fierce battle outside had alarmed them. Although these sky-devouring ominous pythons were dead, their obsessions did not dissipate. They turned into ghosts and scattered in the sky. Yi Shiwen had just rushed in when countless sky-devouring ominous python spirits rushed towards him. They were guarding the graveyard instinctively and attacked him. Clang! The Tai Yu sword in Yi Shiwen's hand erupted with a burst of astonishing rays of light. The sword fell down, and those sky-devouring ominous python spirits were blown away in an instant. It was unknown how many of them had died. However, more sky-devouring ominous python spirits rushed over. It was unknown how many tyrannical experts of the sky-devouring ominous python clan had died over the past countless years. Their ghosts were lingering in this graveyard. Only in such an extreme environment could these ghosts survive, and not dissipate completely. This was because the Een spirit itself was a special form of energy. Not every place could produce Een spirit. Even if it was a tyrannical creature, if it wasn't in an extremely suitable environment, even if it was born, it would quickly disperse. Yi Shiwen's complexion was indifferent while facing these ghosts. He simply snorted coldly. Then, every pore of his body spewed out blazing flames. The surroundings turned into a sea of fire in an instant. It seemed as if these ghosts had met their nemesis. They had been burned into ashes before they could even get close to Yi Shiwen. However, under the guidance of the last obsession of their lives, these ghosts still rushed over like moths flying into a flame. They couldn't stop Yi Shiwen's footsteps, but they still continued to rush towards him. Yi Shiwen didn't care about these ghosts. The Nanming mythical fire around his body transformed into a flame domain. These ghosts were completely isolated from him. They would be burned to death if they approached him. However, he continued to fly towards the depths of the graveyard. He could feel the intensity of the blood and qi left behind in these sky-devouring ominous python skeletons. He could easily determine whether these were the non-phase spirit bones left behind by the ominous python that he needed. The closer he got to the depths of the graveyard, the more powerful the skeletons of these ominous pythons became. Even emperor-level existences were not uncommon. After sensing the invasion of Yi Shiwen's blood and qi, these sky-devouring ominous pythons' skeletons began to move. It was as if the skeletons had been resurrected, and rushed towards Yi Shiwen. However, these emperor-level ominous python skeletons might have posed some threat to Yi Shiwen when they were alive. However, they had been dead for a long time now. So, Yi Shiwen chopped all of them with his sword and sent them flying away. He suddenly felt an extremely strong and terrifying aura rising in the middle of the graveyard of the ominous python skeletons. In the middle of the countless sky-devouring ominous python skeletons, a huge golden skeleton slowly began to exude a terrifying aura. "Who dares to disturb my eternal rest?" An indifferent and ice-cold voice came. A terrifying aura locked Yi Shiwen. He instantly felt as if he was being stared at by something extraordinary. Yi Shiwen's expression remained unchanged. He coldly said, "You're just playing tricks. You're just an obsession. I would have been afraid of you if you were still alive. But now you're just an obsession. Do you think you can scare me away in front of me?" Yi Shiwen's eyes were like torches. He could clearly see through everything. He instantly realized that this was the doing of the huge ominous python's skeletons. The old ancestor of the ominous python skeletons was attached to the huge skeletons. It wasn't clear how much more tyrannical this old ancestor's soul was compared to the other ominous python skeletons. It had died countless years ago. However, its obsession hadn't dissipated. It had remained here all this time. It could be said to be very powerful. What a foreign invader! Suddenly, the ominous python skeletons roared, and the huge golden skeletons began to shake slowly. The surrounding seawater also began to roll out in all directions along with the shaking of the golden skeletons. Roar! The golden skeletons burst into a loud roar. In an instant, it seemed as if a fierce, ominous python had been resurrected. Flesh and blood began to grow on its huge golden skeletons. In just a moment, it seemed as if it had returned to its previous state. However, it was different from the other ominous python's skeletons. This ominous python's body wasn't black. On the contrary, it was golden in color. It seemed as if it was cast from gold. It was exuding a blazing brilliance. It seemed as if it was going to illuminate the entire sea area. A monstrous ominous aura covered the sky. In an instant it formed a great momentum. It evolved into an ominous python's body, and pounced towards Yi Shiwen. Quick, quick, quick! This golden ominous python suddenly pounced in front of Yi Shiwen. Its imposing aura soared to the sky. Clang! The Tai-Yu sword in Yi Shiwen's hand issued a clanging sound. Then, it suddenly chopped down. Poochie! The sky-devouring ominous python's shadow exploded on the spot, as if it was made of paper. It was directly cut apart. Yi Shiwen had just chopped the ominous python's phantom. He saw that the golden ominous python's ancestor had already opened its bloody mouth and pounced towards him. Suddenly, it opened its mouth and unleashed all kinds of magical powers. The magical power of swallow the heavens and devour the earth could even swallow the heaven and earth, let alone a person. If one were to be bitten, even an emperor lord would lose a layer of skin. This was the skeleton of the ominous python's ancestor. It was obviously just a skeleton. However, it could erupt with the combat power of an emperor lord. Moreover, it was just a Yin spirit. One could imagine how powerful it was when it was alive. Yi Shiwen understood that the non-phase spirit bone he was looking for was on the corpse of the ancestor of the heaven-devouring ominous python. No matter how he considered it, it was imperative to kill this ancestor of the heaven-devouring ominous python. The magical power of swallow the heavens and devour the earth was far inferior to the previous emperor-level ominous python's power. However, it was much more terrifying in terms of magical power. In an instant, the heaven and earth seemed to have turned into a bloody mouth. It swallowed Yi Shiwen and wanted to bite him to death. Yi Shiwen smiled coldly. Go to hell. Hand over the non-phase spirit bone. Chapter 3052. The Tai-Yu sword in Yi Shiwen's hand kept buzzing. A sword chi was instantly unsheathed, and the magical power of swallow the heavens and devour the earth was smashed on the spot. This magical power of swallow the heavens and devour the earth was nothing to Yi Shiwen. It could not pose any fundamental threat to him. If this golden sky-devouring ominous python was at the peak of its life, Yi Shiwen would have immediately turned around and left without any hesitation. After all, it was the 9th realm, or even the existence of the heavenly master level. However, even if it was ferocious now, it was just a nether spirit causing mischief. Roar! At this time, this terrifying golden sky-devouring ominous python's ancestor had instantly rushed up and rushed in front of Yi Shiwen. His bloody mouth was vast and mighty, but there was also a dense Yin qi that had already been completely melted together. There was corpse qi rippling out, giving people a feeling of contradiction. Yi Shiwen's reaction was not slow. He blasted out a punch, which turned into 6 paths, forming the 6 paths of reincarnation fist. The punch penetrated the space and blasted into the golden sky-devouring ominous python's mouth, and instantly exploded. Rumble! This golden sky-devouring ominous python's ancestor directly flew out upside down. Its huge body directly brought along monstrous waves. Its head was already dripping with blood, and its flesh had collapsed, revealing its golden bones. That was its foundation. Even such a powerful punch from Yi Shiwen had no way to break its golden bones. It could be imagined how powerful this golden sky-devouring ominous python's physical body was when it was alive. In the same realm, it was almost invincible. Even Yi Shiwen's gilded tyrant form couldn't break it. Roar! This golden sky-devouring ominous python quickly stabilized its body. At this moment, a huge mountain-like tail suddenly pierced out from the ground, like a world-destroying spear, and blasted towards Yi Shiwen. Clang! Yi Shiwen's reaction was not slow at all. Tai-Yu sword instantly slashed down, and cut the golden sky-devouring ominous python's tail. Clang! A loud voice, like a great bell, turned into waves of sound waves that spread in all directions. Tai-Yu's sword collided with the golden python's tail. For a moment, sparks flew everywhere. It was not an ordinary sparks, but a sea of fire that burned the endless deep sea. Even the space was burned. The tail of the golden sky-devouring ominous python was actually able to fight against a Dao weapon like the Taiyue sword without showing any signs of being at a disadvantage. The strength of its body was almost comparable to a Dao weapon. It was so strong that it was impressive. Roar! Yi Shiwen's sword swept away the spear-like tail. At the same time, the golden sky-devouring ominous python ancestor had already opened his bloody mouth. It tore through the layers of space and instantly bit towards Yi Shiwen. The world was sucked into his mouth in an instant. The entire space domain collapsed under his bite. Ka. The sound of space shattering was particularly clear in this deep sea. The space where Yi Shiwen was actually began to shatter inch by inch. This magical power was indeed not a trivial matter. Yi Shiwen did not have the slightest change in expression. His hair fluttered in the wind. He was arrogant and domineering. His expression was indifferent. He took a step forward, and a huge footprint was left in the void. His figure instantly rushed out like an arrow from a bow. 6 paths of reincarnation fist. Yi Shiwen blasted out another 6 paths of reincarnation fist. This fist was full of unparalleled strength. It suppressed everything in the world, and no one could resist it. That punch caused the world to tremble violently. The punch tore through the sky, bringing with it countless fist Dao laws, forming a terrifying wind. At this time, in the mouth of the golden sky-devouring ominous python, a man wearing a python robe appeared. This person's appearance could not be seen at all. One could only see his domineering figure. He was once invincible, and the ultimate old ancestor who created the supreme glory of the ominous python clan. Sky-devouring fist. This figure also blasted out a punch. It was also a supreme fist technique. In this punch, it seemed as if the surrounding space had completely collapsed. It directly collided with Yi Shiwen's 6 paths of reincarnation fist. The 6 paths of reincarnation fist instantly suppressed down. The sky-devouring fist that the figure blasted out turned into an ominous python, rushing straight to the sky and the earth. It was like an eternal dragon, and it fiercely blasted in Yi Shiwen's direction. Boom! The 6 paths of reincarnation wheel suppressed the world above, and the ominous python was madly roaring and wreaking havoc. The scene seemed to be in a stalemate. However, this stalemate only lasted for an instant. The 6 paths roulette slowly rotated, and with every inch it rotated, the sky-devouring ominous serpent's body would shrink a little, and the space that he could struggle would shrink a little. The 6 paths of reincarnation fist continued to rotate. Finally, the ominous python's shadow exploded on the spot, and it turned into infinite energy that dispersed in all directions. Yi Shiwen's 6 paths of reincarnation fist did not reduce its momentum. It blasted into the chest of the man in the python robe. Boom! The man in the python robe let out a muffled groan. His entire body was blasted apart by Yi Shiwen's punch on the spot, and it turned into a terrifying explosion. The 6 paths of reincarnation wheel was still bombarding, and it directly blasted into the mouth of the ominous python. Boom! Another series of explosions came. The ominous python was once again smashed by Yi Shiwen, and its entire head flew out. However, because its body was too huge, its body was not sent flying by Yi Shiwen's punch. At this critical moment, the ominous python's tail was like a long spear, and it directly penetrated Yi Shiwen's chest. Boom! Yi Shiwen blasted out a punch and contended with the tail. He was not to be outdone. His punch caused sparks to splatter, and the mountain-like tail was sent flying. Roar! After its head was smashed by Yi Shiwen's punch, the ominous python was not seriously injured. Instead, it became even more ferocious, and it was incomparably fierce. Yi Shiwen frowned slightly. This ominous python was more troublesome than he had imagined. Its body was simply immortal. Although only its bones were real, and the rest were illusions, It was still very troublesome even if it was only to this extent. Because he didn't have a real body, this was a weakness. But to some extent it was also an advantage. No matter how many times he destroyed his body, it was useless. He could still recover very quickly. This was his home field. He could absorb too many evil spirits. Unless he could destroy his corpse, he wouldn't be able to do anything. If it was a protracted battle, it would definitely not be Yi Shiwen's opponent. However, Yi Shiwen did not have the time for a protracted battle. He could only end the battle quickly. Since it is a dead person, then it is a corpse calamity. Since it is a corpse calamity, then I will suppress it. Yi Shiwen looked coldly at the old ancestor of the ominous python in front of him. Conventional methods were definitely not a solution. The only way was to suppress the nether soul of the old ancestor of the ominous python. Without the nether soul causing trouble, there was nothing else to worry about. It was not a problem at all. A scripture appeared above Yi Shiwen's head, and it was releasing a kind of holy aura for a while. This was a scripture to suppress the corpse calamity. In the heavens there were also extremely powerful corpse calamities. Yi Shiwen himself had suppressed them several times. There were large and small-scale ones. The large ones could even fight against the incomparably powerful emperor. Therefore, there were also martial arts techniques that were specially used to suppress these nether souls. They were specially used to deal with these nether souls. Originally, with Yi Shiwen's skill, there was no difference whether he used this specialized method or not. However, he was fighting for time now. Naturally, he did not care so much. For the nether souls, this martial arts technique was their nemesis. In this regard, these nether souls were very sensitive and perceived it almost immediately. Even if the nether soul was already at the emperor level and had essentially been separated from the ordinary nether souls, it would still be restrained. After all, he was not like the ominous ghost emperor who became a ghost emperor. At that point, he could be considered to be able to get rid of the influence of this scripture. A bit of fear flashed in his eyes. This was a kind of intrinsic restraint that had nothing to do with cultivation. It was already inevitable when his obsession incarnated into a nether soul. The scripture above Yi Shiwen's head turned into a magical power and instantly suppressed the old ancestor of the ominous python. Roar! The old ancestor of the ominous python instantly roared after his death. His eyes were like cold lightning. His huge body was like a huge mountain rolling back. This old ancestor of the ominous python immediately counterattacked. If he continued to be suppressed by Yi Shiwen's scripture to suppress the corpse calamity, perhaps even if he was once invincible in the world, he would not be able to withstand such suppression. An extremely fierce look flashed in his eyes. He turned into a middle-aged man wearing an official robe. He held a long spear in his hand and blasted towards Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen smiled coldly and slashed down with his sword. Bang! The long sword and the long spear fiercely collided, setting off boundless stormy waves. Suppress for me! Yi Shiwen let out a long and loud shout. The innumerable scriptures that were used to suppress the calamity rotated rapidly above his head. They eventually fused together and turned into a suppress character. Then, it bypassed the long spear and pressed down towards the head of the golden python ancestor. Ah! This old ancestor of the ominous python began to scream crazily and mournfully. His nether soul hidden in the endless corpses was affected and began to roll in the sea. Now, Yi Shiwen directly grabbed a big hand and grabbed the old ancestor of the ominous python. Roar! On the body of the old ancestor of the ominous python, there seemed to be something being pulled out by Yi Shiwen, inch by inch. Chapter 3053. Roar! The roar of the old ancestor of the golden sky-devouring python was earth-shattering. He was struggling, constantly struggling, but the word suppress on top of his head was constantly suppressing. The old ancestor of the golden sky devouring python only felt that his power was gradually being sealed. Slowly, his power seemed to be drawn out of his body. Even though he was experienced and knowledgeable, he didn't know how many magical powers and martial arts he had mastered. An ordinary emperor was really not his opponent. However, he also had a fatal flaw. In the face of the ancient scripture that was specially created to suppress this kind of corpse disaster, it went straight to his weakness. Therefore, he had no way to resist at all. He could only struggle constantly. Under the suppression of the scripture that Yi Shiwen had suppressed, the golden sky devouring python could only think of ways to prevent himself from being drawn out of the corpse by this force. Once he was drawn out, the consequences were simply unimaginable. Even though he was just a specter transformed from an obsession, he was also very clear in this aspect. Yi Shiwen's hands were constantly changing the seals. The word suppress was constantly bursting with dazzling golden light. It seemed to completely suppress all evil, leaving no way for this specter to survive. Roar! The old ancestor of the golden sky devouring python saw that he couldn't suppress his specter and was about to be extracted out. He immediately roared and attacked Yi Shiwen. The long spear directly pierced out as if it wanted to tear the world apart. It wanted to blast Yi Shiwen into pieces. Bang! A loud rumbling sound was heard, and the spear stopped 3 inches in front of Yi Shiwen. The time robe appeared on Yi Shiwen's body. Although there was a huge wound on his chest due to the severe injuries caused by the spear, most of his abilities were still there. The long spear pierced in front of Yi Shiwen. It seemed as if it had broken through the endless energy in a split second and set off a terrifying energy frenzy. The collision point between the two sides was the center, and the energy surged in all directions. Yi Shiwen's expression didn't change. Even if the long spear had pierced 3 inches in front of his face, his expression was still the same. His hands didn't stop at all. He was constantly changing the seals. Every minute and every second, he was suppressing the specter of the golden sky devouring python. This golden python was even more ferocious. Its long spear unceasingly bombarded towards Yi Shiwen like raindrops. It could pierce through the time domain around Yi Shiwen every time, but it couldn't really break the time robe. After all, there was still a huge gap between it and the terrifying attack of Emperor Primordius. Whoosh! The martial emperor seal on Yi Shiwen's body suddenly flew out. It grew bigger and bigger like a mountain. 3,000 martial principles were released all at once. They pressed downwards and increased the power of the suppressed character. Roar! Under the suppression of the martial emperor's seal, the old ancestor of the golden sky devouring ominous python suddenly felt a sharp increase in pressure. He kept roaring, but it was useless. He couldn't break free. He could feel that his strength was getting weaker and weaker. The long spear in his hand was also constantly bombarding Yi Shiwen. However, he couldn't deal with Yi Shiwen in the end. They're out! Yi Shiwen fiercely opened his eyes all of a sudden. The ancestor of the golden heaven devouring ominous python instantly transformed into its incomparably huge body. It was constantly struggling, and its huge body stirred up monstrous waves in the sea. On his body, a specter was slowly peeling off bit by bit. Although the speed wasn't fast, there were still endless talismans on this corpse suppressing the specter. They were trying to seal the specter into the bones again. However, Yi Shiwen still managed to pull the specter out with this scripture. Even if it was only a little bit, it was already the beginning. Things would become easier later. However, Yi Shiwen's face revealed a somewhat anxious look. He could already feel that a terrifying aura was already rushing over here. That majestic and tyrannical aura was so boundless that even Yi Shiwen could feel it from far away. It must be a supreme expert of the heaven-devouring ominous python clan. He must finish everything before that terrifying existence returns. He didn't want to stay and be surrounded. Roar! 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 The old ancestor of the golden sky devouring ominous python continued to struggle and roar. However, it was of no use. The more he struggled and roared, the more he was pulled out. As more and more parts were pulled out, his strength was affected more and more, and he could only struggle less and less. If it weren't for the fierce nature of his heart, perhaps he would have completely collapsed. "Come out." Yi Shiwen formed a big hand and directly grabbed above the old ancestor of the golden sky devouring ominous python. He grabbed the specter's specter and pulled it out from the body of the golden sky devouring ominous python little by little. In fact, he had completely and utterly extracted the Een spirit from his body. This specter directly transformed into a ominous python. It was thousands of miles long. It was extremely huge. There was a terrifying killing intent in its eyes. In fact, there was only such tyrannical killing intent in its eyes. There was nothing else. This specter was formed from only one obsession. Therefore, compared to other creatures, this specter's thoughts were very simple and pure. It only had tyrannical and devouring thoughts. Almost at the moment when it was pulled out, the last trace of clarity and reason disappeared without the suppression of the power of the corpse. Only these tyrannical thoughts were left. This specter had completely turned into an ominous spirit. It rushed towards Yi Shiwen and wanted to bite him to death. However, Yi Shiwen wasn't afraid at all. If it was in his body, Yi Shiwen might be a little afraid. However, it was just an ominous spirit. No matter how terrifying it was when it was alive, it was nothing for Yi Shiwen, who was already in the Emperor realm. Suppress. The word suppress continued to burst into bright light. This time, it didn't suppress the old ancestor of the golden sky devouring ominous python. Instead, it suppressed his ominous spirit. Roar! With continuous roars, the huge body of this ominous spirit burned into ashes in the void bit by bit under the suppression of the word suppress. It was completely annihilated. 4 creatures that didn't have eternal life, even if they were powerful enough to reach the Emperor level, they would still die. Even if they became spirits, they had to be nurtured in a special way in order to be preserved for a long time. Otherwise, even the spirits of Emperor-level creatures wouldn't be of much use. They would automatically turn into ashes with the passage of time. Yi Shiwen breathed a sigh of relief. He finally succeeded. In front of him, the body of the old ancestor of the golden sky devouring ominous python began to gradually melt in the seawater. Gradually, only the huge body that Yi Shiwen saw in the beginning was left. Success! Yi Shiwen formed a big chi-condensed hand and directly grabbed the corpse. Since the ominous spirit born on the corpse had been eliminated, it naturally wouldn't resist. However, at this moment, an amazing sword light broke through the sky and instantly broke Yi Shiwen's big chi-condensed hand. Boom! The sword light submerged into the bottom of the sea and set off shocking waves. The mud mixed into the seawater and muddied this part of the sea area. Who is it? Yi Shiwen suddenly opened his eyes, and a wisp of light burst out from his eyes. You'd better not have any thoughts about the phaseless spirit bone. A frivolous and indifferent voice sounded behind Yi Shiwen. A figure finally emerged. I didn't expect you to be one step ahead of me. The figure finally appeared in front of Yi Shiwen. It was a man wearing an emperor robe. He had 12 pairs of wings behind him. Even the exposed parts of his face and hands were covered with feathers. There was a somewhat frivolous smile on his face. It seemed that he was certain that he could defeat Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen's eyes were firmly locked on this man. He slowly said, "If I'm not mistaken, you are the Feather Emperor?" "Martial Emperor, I didn't expect you to be able to trample on my origin. You are really not simple," the man said indifferently. "There are rumors that you were seriously injured. Now it seems that they must have been deceived by you." Yi Shiwen slowly opened his mouth and said. Countless information streaked across his mind like a lightning. Countless thoughts flashed through his mind. He had never thought that the Feather Emperor would be able to reappear. Previously, the Pill Emperor and the others had also said that the Feather Emperor would definitely not be able to participate in this expedition due to his serious injuries. Yi Shiwen firmly believed this. After all, with the cultivation and experience of the Pill Emperor and the others, pretending to be injured wouldn't be able to deceive them. It was as if someone had pretended to be injured in front of him in an attempt to deceive him. It was simply impossible to do so. The eyes of the Emperor Lords could see through falsehoods and see through the essence. It was almost impossible to deceive them. Therefore, he didn't think too much about it in the beginning. Now that he thought about it, he was afraid that he had indeed missed out a lot. Although he didn't know what method he used to deceive all the emperors, it was obvious that his purpose of appearing here was also very obvious. It was for the phaseless spiritual bone. "It's not easy to deceive that old fellow, Elder Shin," the Feather Emperor said faintly. There was a somewhat complacent smile on his face. It was obvious that he was quite proud of himself. "In that case, the person who alarmed the sky-devouring ominous Python clan must have been you." Yi Shiwen glanced at him indifferently and said, "That's right, it was me. Otherwise, the sky-devouring ominous Python clan might have been discovered only after you had reached the tomb if you had been a little more careful," the Feather Emperor said with a smile. "However, it's all thanks to me. Otherwise, do you think that there would be no one guarding such an important tomb? And you had the opportunity to obtain the phaseless spirit bone so easily. Now that the big guy is about to return, how about we make a deal? We will each take half of the phaseless spirit bone. What do you think?" Chapter 3054. How about it? Let's make a deal. We'll split the phaseless spiritual bone in half. How about it? Yu Emperor said confidently, as if he was very sure that Yi Shiwen would agree. His expression was very calm because he also sensed that a big guy was coming in this direction. When that big guy arrived, neither of them would be able to get what they wanted. Originally, this was not in his plan. He did not intend to cooperate with Dendi and the others from the beginning. He just wanted to use Dendi and the others to get the phaseless spiritual bone, which was the most difficult to get. By then, he would be able to use the phaseless spiritual bone to refine a few pellets. Wouldn't that be great? Although for pellets, the more they were consumed, the weaker the effect would be. The body would also develop resistance, but it was still much faster than normal cultivation. However, who knew that in his plan, Yi Shiwen would appear? In the end, Yi Shiwen was one step ahead of him. He could only settle for the next best thing and share it with Yi Shiwen. Even if it was an equal share, it was still much better than only getting one. The most difficult part of the whole pellet refining was to get the phaseless spiritual bone. Otherwise, they would not have prepared for tens of thousands of years before starting. If he hadn't sensed the arrival of that big guy, he wouldn't have given up so easily. He would have snatched the non-phase spirit bone from Yi Shiwen's hands. Otherwise, he wouldn't have cared so much since he had already reached this stage. However, in his opinion, this was a charity for Yi Shiwen. He put his hands behind his back and was in high spirit. In his eyes, there was unimaginable transcendental confidence. "Cooperate? Why should I cooperate with you?" Yi Shiwen looked at Yu Emperor and smiled coldly. "What?" Yu Emperor did not seem to think that Yi Shiwen might refuse. He had thought of all the possibilities, but he did not think that Yi Shiwen would refuse. The situation in front of him was obviously a situation where both sides would benefit if they cooperated. As long as it was a normal person, they would choose to cooperate. "It seems that you really want to do this the hard way?" Yu Emperor's expression turned cold. His eyes flashed with a horrifying killing intent. "Do you want to do this the hard way? You?" Yi Shiwen grinned and said. Their auras erupted silently, and the terrifying aura of an imperial lord swept through the entire graveyard, startling many of the Een spirits in the graveyard. Many of the Een spirits were only at the Divine King realm, so they were directly turned into ashes by the Emperor realm aura. Even the Een spirits that were formed after the death of a quasi-emperor sky-devouring python could only tremble in fear when the two auras collided. They could not fight back at all. Only the emperor sky-devouring python Een spirits could barely resist it. However, they could only resist. They didn't dare to get close at all. Just the aura alone was enough to make them feel like they couldn't resist. After all, they were no longer at the peak. Not all emperor-level sky-devouring pythons were like the golden sky-devouring python old ancestor. Even if they only had Een spirits left, they could still control corpses to fight against imperial emperors. That kind of person was already an omnipotent existence. If it wasn't for the limited lifespan of emperor-level creatures, they would definitely be a supreme giant in the outer domain if they could cultivate endlessly. However, if it wasn't for their own bloodline, it wouldn't be easy for ordinary creatures to cultivate to that level. It was almost impossible. "You Emperor, it's you." A surprised voice came from afar. Then, Denda flew over from afar, looking extremely embarrassed. Denda looked very embarrassed. Obviously, he had just experienced a fierce battle, and he had barely rushed here. However, before he could take a breath, he saw two familiar figures. One of them was naturally Yi Shiwen. There was nothing strange about it. However, he had never imagined that he would see the Feather Emperor here. Every single one of those that were able to cultivate to the imperial monarch realm was a wise man amongst wise men, and they practically instantly understood the principle of seeing through the affairs of the world. All of this was probably due to the Feather Emperor adding fuel to the fire from behind. Earlier, they were discovered as soon as they entered, and the Feather Emperor was probably playing tricks in the shadows as well. He had known you Emperor for tens of thousands of years. He had experienced many things from the beginning to the end, so he naturally understood very well. "It's really unexpected. We all thought that you were seriously injured, but you were actually able to deceive our eyes. You must have paid a great price." Denda's face revealed a somewhat mocking smile. "In order to achieve today's goal, you can be considered to have put in a lot of effort. Dendi, you don't have to say this nonsense. If you continue to delay, when the other sky-devouring ominous pythons come over, even you and I will be very difficult to escape." You Emperor's face didn't show the slightest bit of emotion, nor did he feel the slightest bit of guilt. Dendi naturally understood this principle. As the entire sky-devouring ominous pythons were alarmed, every step forward was very difficult. He had just experienced a fierce battle, and if it wasn't for the timely arrival of Elder Khan in the end, he might not have been able to escape. Even the Emperor realm was in such a state. One could imagine how bad the current situation was. If they continued to delay, they might really not be able to escape, as you Emperor had said. He even sensed that a super terrifying existence was rushing over. "You also know my strength. Even if the two of you join forces, you won't be a match for me. Now I will give you a chance. Let's split the phaseless spirit bone in half. Each of us will take half. This way, we won't hurt each other's relationship. What do you think?" You Emperor said patiently. He wouldn't have cared if it was just Yi Shiwen alone. Yi Shiwen had suppressed the old ancestor of the golden sky-devouring ominous python with lightning speed. But that was only because Yi Shiwen had used a special power technique. In his eyes, all of that was not worth mentioning. However, it would be completely different if Denda was included. Even if Dendi wasn't good at fighting, it would still be a huge pressure to have such a great master of the Third Realm watching from the side. Denda looked quite tempted. They had come this time for the phaseless spirit bone. They were very unhappy that they would have to split it with this traitor in the end. However, they would lose everything if they didn't agree with you Emperor's proposal. None of them would be able to get it. Both sides would benefit if they worked together, and both sides would lose if they were divided. He was very clear on this point. Even if there were two people on his side, there was no need to completely fall out. Not to mention, in his heart, Even though Yi Shiwen was a junior from the same hometown, he wasn't as terrifying as Yu Emperor. He had worked with Yu Emperor for many years. Therefore, he was more aware of Yu Emperor's amazing strength. Among the Fourth Realm, Yu Emperor's strength was also one of the top. Martial Emperor, what do you think? Denda looked at Yi Shiwen. At this moment, he naturally couldn't have any disagreement with Yi Shiwen. Work together? Why should we work with him? You think too highly of yourself if you want to take advantage of this situation. Yi Shiwen's expression was indifferent. His attitude was exactly the same as before. He had no intention of changing at all. So, Martial Emperor, you don't agree? Feather Emperor's expression became increasingly indifferent. He hadn't expected that Yi Shiwen would still dare to be so arrogant at this point. In fact, Yi Shiwen didn't even agree to his proposal to divide the spoils equally. This was an extremely arrogant and despotic suggestion. That's right, I don't agree. Who do you think you are? How dare you snatch my things? Yi Shiwen had fought hard until now. He had killed 2 Emperor-level existences in order to get his hands on the phaseless spirit bone. Yu Emperor didn't do anything. Yet, he actually wanted a share of the spoils. He was simply thinking too much. Good. I haven't seen anyone who dared to be arrogant with me for many years. Yu Emperor was so angry that he laughed. It seems that if I don't teach you a lesson, you won't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Although an Emperor Lord's age couldn't be directly determined, it could be roughly determined by how long the Emperor Lord had been cultivating. Yu Emperor looked at Yi Shiwen's soaring spirit and knew that Yi Shiwen hadn't cultivated for a long time. He was just a junior. Although age didn't mean anything in the Emperor Lord realm, the older ones were often more powerful than the younger ones. Teach me a lesson? If you can do it, then go ahead and try. Cut the crap. I don't have time to talk nonsense with you. Let's fight. Yi Shiwen didn't have any intention to talk nonsense with him. That terrifying aura was gradually approaching. Dan Emperor could only stand in the same trench as Yi Shiwen. No matter what, he couldn't stand on Yu Emperor's side. Although it seemed to him that this was an extremely unwise decision, he couldn't not support it. Madman, this was a madman. The killing intent in Yu Emperor's eyes became even more intense. In his eyes, Yi Shiwen had already become a madman. He would rather fight with him to the point where neither of them could obtain the phaseless spirit bone. But he wasn't willing to give in. This was also a common problem between young Emperor Lords. Young Emperor Lords were naturally young and vigorous. They had been invincible geniuses all along the way. They didn't know what compromise was. You really won't shed a tear until you see the coffin. It seems that if you don't use some real skills, you won't know why the flowers are so red. A cold killing intent appeared on Yu Emperor's face. You rejected my good intentions. I'll let you know what kind of price you have to pay. The killing intent on his body was awe-inspiring, and it directly materialized. He was completely infuriated by Yi Shiwen. His many years of planning might go up in smoke because of Yi Shiwen's stubbornness. How could he not be incomparably angry? Yu Emperor's body moved, and he suddenly flew out. The wings on his back opened, and he flew out like a ferocious bird pouncing on its prey. In an instant, everything in the world seemed to have disappeared. Only Yu Emperor's terrifying figure was left in the world. He threw a punch towards Yi Shiwen. Chapter 3055. Yi Shiwen saw Denda's expression and naturally knew what he was thinking. He immediately said, "Denda, don't worry. I'm not young and rash, nor am I acting out of spite. It's just a Feather Emperor. You don't have to worry at all. Watch how I take down the Feather Emperor." After Yi Shiwen finished speaking, he soared into the sky like a golden-winged rock and clashed with the Feather Emperor. Just a Feather Emperor? Denda was a little dumbfounded because he didn't expect Yi Shiwen's evaluation of the Feather Emperor to be so low. He didn't know where Yi Shiwen got his confidence from, but he didn't have a choice at this moment. He raised his strength to the extreme and watched as the two sides collided. Boom! In an instant, the two sides were like two peerless, ferocious birds that collided fiercely. It even set off a terrifying wave. In an instant, a shocking collision spread out in all directions. Yi Shiwen's clothes fluttered in the wind, but he didn't move at all. In the next moment, he attacked again. The entire 6 paths of reincarnation appeared behind him. Every time the 6 paths of reincarnation rotated, the power of reincarnation would gush out. It could be said to be earth-shattering. It contained the mysteries of the universe and the mysteries of heaven and earth. He had truly practiced the 6 paths of reincarnation fist to the extreme and opened up a unique path that belonged to him. He wasn't inferior to the Azura Demon King back then. This is the 6 paths of reincarnation fist. Denda's eyes widened. In the fortune realm, perhaps not many people could understand this fist technique. However, to him, this fist technique wasn't unfamiliar. When he became an emperor, the 6 paths of reincarnation fist had already been passed down in the world. It was extremely powerful. However, he had never seen anyone who could practice this fist technique to this level. Moreover, it was obvious that this person had cultivated his own path and opened up a world of his own. Go to reincarnation. Yi Shiwen's fist blasted towards the Feather Emperor. Countless Een spirits of the ominous python seemed to have sensed something as they flew into the celestial Tao. They were killed, and the might of Yi Shiwen's fist increased by a lot. Yi Shiwen's fist had become much more powerful. What martial art is this? The Feather Emperor had lived for so many years, but he had never seen such a fist technique before. It contained the principles of the universe and involved the cycle of reincarnation. This was even higher than comprehending a single type of martial arts. However, there was no time for him to hesitate. Yi Shiwen's 6 paths of reincarnation fist set off an earth-shattering Orochi frenzy, which immediately caused a strong resonance between the heaven and the earth. The 6 paths of reincarnation suppressed all directions. Kill! Feather Emperor shouted and punched. An extremely pure fist energy gushed out of his body in an instant. It instantly turned into a monstrous, ferocious bird that pounced towards Yi Shiwen. Divine Bird Heaven-Shattering Fist. The Feather Sovereign let out a roar and the divine bird soared into the sky, clashing with the 6 paths roulette. Bang! 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 The divine bird soared high into the sky and clashed with the 6 paths of reincarnation fist. Earth-shattering energy waves were released every time they collided. The Feather Sovereign was indeed worthy of being the main force that Elder Kan and the others had placed their hopes on. His martial arts were tyrannical to the extreme, even more so than Elder Kan, who had cultivated for countless years. His combat prowess even far surpassed that of the emperor-level sky-devouring python that Yi Shiwen had slain in the dragon vein. The divine bird grew larger and larger. Every time it flapped its wings, the heaven and earth would violently turn upside down. It was actually trying to break free from the cycle of reincarnation and escape the control of the 6 paths of reincarnation. The two's fist energy turned into endless energy in the deep sea as they collided. How could Yi Shiwen allow the Feather Sovereign to break through his 6 paths of reincarnation fist? His expression was solemn as he punched out again. The space in his left hand stabilized the heaven and earth, while the time in his right formed the river of time. Time and space were the foundation of the universe. Yi Shiwen hadn't reached that stage yet. That was the peak of his 6 paths of reincarnation fist, which he had planned out himself. This was the true peak that even the creator of the 6 paths of reincarnation fist, the Azura Demon King, had never imagined. The 6 paths of reincarnation fist's 6 paths of reincarnation fist's creator, the Azura Demon King, relied on the heaven and earth of the heavens and earth. It used the heaven and earth of the heavens and earth as the foundation to carry out the 6 paths of reincarnation. However, this required an extremely deep understanding of the heaven and earth. Thus, the power of the 6 paths of reincarnation fist was a little lacking in the fortune realm. Yi Shiwen had been improving his cultivation over the past few years, but he had also been researching how to improve the power of these lost techniques. Especially when he knew that there might be a heavenly venerable level expert, he felt even more strongly that he had to prepare for many things in advance. The 6 paths of reincarnation fist borrowed the power of heaven and earth. If he couldn't borrow it, he might as well create a world of his own, using time and space to create a chaotic world. In this world, the 6 paths of reincarnation was the supreme law. As such, the power of the 6 paths of reincarnation fist would increase exponentially. However, he hadn't completely integrated the power of time and space into one. Otherwise, he would truly be able to rebuild the universe. At that time, the power of the 6 paths of reincarnation fist would truly rise to a whole new level. Even so, the power of the 6 paths of reincarnation fist had directly risen to a whole new level after adding the power of time and space. Feather Emperor instantly felt the pressure on him increase exponentially. A look of disbelief flashed across his face. This unknown fist technique utilized the power of reincarnation. It was originally an inexplicably profound fist technique. Now that its power had increased exponentially, the pressure on him had doubled. Bang! 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 The two of them collided wildly in the deep sea. Feather Emperor retreated again and again under Yi Shiwen's powerful offensive. It was unknown how much seawater in the deep sea had been turned into ashes by the collision. Even the basic atoms had evaporated on the spot. However, the sea was endless. No matter how much was destroyed, it could be immediately replenished. However, it was also because of this that the endless seawater isolated the final damage between the two of them. If they were fighting on the sea, the battle between the two of them would be enough to explode the galaxy in the sky. Yi Shiwen didn't show any mercy. He forced his way forward step by step. His clothes were fluttering under the violent waves of energy. So strong. Denda finally understood why Yi Shiwen was so confident earlier. Feather Emperor was almost the strongest among the 4th realm experts. However, Yi Shiwen was even stronger than him. He was almost the strongest 4th realm expert he had ever seen. He started to feel lucky that his side could invite such an expert. Moreover, such an expert wasn't as despicable as Feather Emperor. However, Denda's expression gradually became anxious. That terrifying existence was getting closer and closer. It would arrive soon. Taoist Wu Di, hurry up! Yi Shiwen heard Denda's words and naturally understood what he was worried about. He said, Taoist Wu Di, don't worry. Watch me destroy him. You're too much. Feather Emperor saw that Yi Shiwen didn't put him in his eyes at all. Yi Shiwen completely ignored him like he was an ant. The anger in Feather Emperor's heart was about to burn everything down. Bang! A loud rumbling sound was heard as Yi Shiwen's fist blasted into the Feather Emperor's body. The Feather Emperor's body was instantly blown away. However, no flesh and blood could be seen flying out. Instead, countless feathers were seen fluttering in the sky. Did I let him escape? Yi Shiwen squinted his eyes. His attack missed. His opponent had used an extremely powerful movement technique to instantly replace his real body. He clearly felt that his attack had almost hit his real body. Not far away, Feather Emperor's figure slowly appeared. He looked at Yi Shiwen with eyes full of hatred. Just now, he was almost seriously injured by Yi Shiwen's punch. It also made him understand how terrifying this person in front of him was. I'm not leaving. I'll drag it out until that big guy comes back. I'd like to see how you're going to get the phaseless spirit bone. Since I can't get it, then no one else can. Feather Emperor's face showed a cold expression. He had been completely infuriated by Yi Shiwen. Even if he had to use this method of mutual destruction, he didn't care. He was very clear that with Yi Shiwen here today, he could forget about getting the phaseless spirit bone. Since he couldn't get it, then no one else could get it. Otherwise, how could he vent his anger today? You want to wait until that big guy comes back? I don't think you have that chance, Yi Shiwen said coldly. All of this took a long time to describe, but in fact, it was only a moment. There was still time, although there wasn't much time left. Ha ha ha, I, Feather Emperor, have been unstoppable all my life. I didn't expect to suffer a big setback here. Feather Emperor laughed loudly. Yi Shiwen's disdainful voice came into his ears. Not only will you suffer a setback today, but you will also leave your life here. Yi Shiwen's voice hadn't even faded when his whole body had already pounced on him. The 6 paths of reincarnation fist split the world and suppressed reincarnation. The fist energy was also unparalleled. The Feather Emperor's entire body was trembling violently as countless streams of energy gushed out. In an instant, a feather robe covered his entire body, covering all his weaknesses. Under the cover of this feather robe, he directly blasted out a punch and collided with Yi Shiwen's 6 paths of reincarnation fist on the spot. Boom! It was another terrifying collision. With their fists as the center, the sky shook violently and rolled out in all directions. The clothes on their bodies were fluttering. Yi Shiwen's body didn't move an inch. He was like a glaring Vajra between heaven and earth, suppressing all the turmoil. On the other side, Feather Emperor actually didn't fly out. He just swayed slightly and calmed down. All the power was absorbed by his feather robe. Ha ha ha, Martial Emperor, I want to see how you plan to kill me. Chapter 3056. Ha ha ha, Martial Emperor, I'd like to see how you plan to kill me. Feather Emperor didn't expect to get the phaseless spiritual bone. However, if he couldn't get it, no one else could. No matter what kind of means you have, you will die today. If you want to blame someone, blame yourself for scheming against me. Yi Shiwen said in an ice-cold voice. Die. Yi Shiwen took a step forward and suddenly blasted his fist down. His aura violently vibrated, and the world around him suddenly caused a strong resonance. The momentum of the world began to distort, and formed a circular storm with Yi Shiwen as the center. The storm began to rotate violently, and a violent attack instantly blasted out, revealing a terrifying cultivation. Dan Emperor looked at this scene and couldn't help but be frightened. Although he only had the cultivation of the 3rd realm and wasn't good at fighting, he was only good at it compared to the other emperors who had become emperors through martial arts. In terms of combat power, he wasn't too far behind. However, when he saw Yi Shiwen's full strength erupt, even he couldn't help but be frightened. He vaguely remembered the first time he saw Yi Shiwen. Although he had already faintly felt that Yi Shiwen's cultivation might be above his, it had definitely not reached such a level. It was as if the world had been turned upside down. Could it be that he had encountered some kind of miracle in this short period of time? How could he be so powerful? For a moment, many thoughts flashed through Dandy's mind. Many ideas. Feather Emperor roared and a sharp look flashed in his eyes. An extremely condensed spiritual power surged out of his body. In an instant it turned into thousands of figures. These thousands of figures were actually ferocious birds. Each of them could easily destroy a world and tear apart a galaxy. And he stood in the center of these thousands of figures. The Feather Emperor cultivated in this aspect of martial art. He controlled all the ferocious birds in the world and used this to achieve the Tao. It was definitely a supreme technique. Millions of terrifying ferocious birds charged down in a frenzy. Boom! Both sides collided directly. Countless divine abilities and martial arts were fighting and suppressing each other. Just when Dan Emperor thought that this stalemate would continue, he suddenly saw Yi Shiwen take a step forward. His imposing aura suddenly rose by a lot. The might of his divine fist became even more terrifying. The balance that he had just maintained collapsed in an instant. The Feather Emperor was sent flying thousands of miles away by the impact of this terrifying power. Meanwhile, Yi Shiwen's entire body was flashing with golden light. It was as if he was a terrifying existence cast from gold. His clothes were fluttering in the wind due to the shock waves of the explosion. Suddenly, right at this moment, another unexpected event occurred. Loud laughter sounded out from the sky. "Feather Emperor, you're really too useless. Looks like you don't have the fortune to enjoy this shapeless spirit bone. Leave everything to me." A gigantic hand reached out of the void and grabbed the corpse of the patriarch of the golden sky-devouring python. "You're courting death. How dare you snatch something from my hands?" Although Yi Shiwen was still in the battle with the Feather Emperor, he reacted immediately. Tai Yu sword in his hand suddenly moved. Endless sword aura surged in his hand. In an instant, all of them turned into sword talismans and formed a long sword river. Then, he suddenly attacked. Bang! The gigantic hand was cut by the sword radiance of Yi Shiwen's Tai Yu sword. It turned into a mass of spiritual energy on the spot and collapsed in all directions. "How dare you!" Dan Emperor was instantly furious. This matter could be said to be endless. This made him uncontrollably angry. Although he was not good at fighting, he was still an emperor. Naturally, his combat power was not that weak. He immediately took a step forward. Instantly, endless pill aura was released from his body. In an instant, it triggered a change in the power of heaven and earth. It was condensed into a huge pill cauldron by him and smashed towards the void. Clang! The sound of metal colliding rang out. The Pill Emperor's cauldron was actually grabbed by a huge hand. Then, the hand slowly exerted force and the cauldron began to shatter inch by inch. It turned into a terrifying shock wave that spread in all directions. However, that person's figure slowly emerged. That person had a shark's head and his body was covered with scales like a fish. His limbs were thick and powerful. He looked extremely fierce. "Emperor Sea Shark, you're following me?" Yu Emperor grimaced. Unexpectedly, another person had popped up along the way. "From the moment you came to investigate the sky-devouring python clan, I had already sensed it. My clan and the sky-devouring python clan are competing for the hegemony of this sea region. Our relationship is not good. This is something that everyone knows. Anyone who wants to harm the sky-devouring python clan must come to my clan. How could you hide your actions from me?" The shark man sneered, his expression full of pleasure. After he finished speaking, the Emperor of Yu's expression became even more unsightly. He had never thought that while he was scheming against someone else, he would also fall into someone else's trap. "Do you think that your little trick could provoke the sky-devouring python tribe to have such a big reaction? If my tribe didn't help you, none of you would have been able to get in here." Emperor Sea Shark laughed. "My tribe has been drooling over the phaseless spirit bone of the sky-devouring python tribe for a long time. Finally, it's going to fall into our hands." The mantis stalks the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind. "Anyway, I'm not sure who will be the oriole." Yi Shiwen calmly looked at the two in front of him. "Wait until that big guy comes back. Can you two run away?" Yi Shiwen was confident because he had the devil wings. Moreover, he had touched the wings of time. Even if the opponent was strong, he was sure that he could run away. It wasn't a big deal. "Don't worry. He can't come here for a while. My tribe's forefather will deal with him. It's enough to stop him." Emperor Sea Shark chuckled. Apparently, he was confident about this. As soon as they knew Yu Emperor's plan, they had prepared well. Moreover, although this place was the territory of the sky-devouring python tribe, it wasn't far from their territory. Thus, they could use their great power. Don't worry. Now that I'm here, don't even think about getting the phaseless spirit bone. Emperor Sea Shark said contentedly, his face arrogant as if telling them to get lost was giving them face. If that big guy can't come here for a while, it's good. I can beat you all to death. Yi Shiwen didn't mind. Taoist Emperor, you stay here to support me. Leave this to me. Alchemy Emperor could only nod his head solemnly. There was no other way. His cultivation level was lower than the three of them, not to mention that he wasn't good at fighting. The three people in front of him were clearly experts in martial arts. If they really fought, he could only hold them back at most. He wouldn't be able to help at all. Emperor Sea Shark's face darkened. He looked at Yi Shiwen coldly. Seems like you don't want to accept a toast only to drink a forfeit. In the blink of an eye, he made his move. He shot forward like a bolt of lightning, unleashing a punch that caused everything to freeze. It was as if all of the power had been absorbed by the Dong River, and even the magical laws were frozen solid and completely destroyed. In such an environment, the ice-class principle he cultivated was like a fish in the water. Emperor Sea Shark took action when he said he would. He didn't linger or hesitate at all. Apparently, he had absolute confidence in himself. Even the experts at the Fourth Realm couldn't resist this punch. Yi Shiwen could feel that Emperor Sea Shark's competence wasn't ordinary. He was even stronger than Feather King. He was at the peak of Fourth Realm. Facing ordinary peak of Fourth Realm experts, he could defeat Feather King easily. However, Emperor Sea Shark wanted to deal with Yi Shiwen. Anyway, Yi Shiwen knew that no matter what, he didn't have much time. He had to finish this battle quickly. Rule the world. As soon as Yi Shiwen unleashed his sword, it instantly triggered the resonance of the Sword Tao laws between the heavens and the earth. At this moment, all of them condensed and slashed down like a mountain. The heaviness of the earth laws also appeared on the Tai Yu sword. Bang! The sword light directly hit the icicle. The principles of the two sides collided, swallowed, and fought, creating two terrifying shockwaves. You want to resist me here? Emperor Sea Shark was surprised. He didn't think that Yi Shiwen could be that fierce. In this environment, his fighting competence was much stronger than in other places. It was the biggest advantage that the creatures in the Stormy Sea area had when facing the experts of the Fortune God dynasty. He didn't expect that Yi Shiwen could stop his attack with just one slash of his sword. Who was he after all? He was the overlord of this sea area. Although he didn't dare to say that he knew everything about the Fortune God dynasty, at least he knew something about it. It was impossible that he didn't have any information about an Emperor Sea Shark. It was illogical. There were also many people in the Fortune Divine dynasty who were bribed by these foreign existences, becoming their vanguard and being used by them. Therefore, they had always been very well informed. I don't care who you are. You must die. Emperor Sea Shark's eyes had a savage gleam. His hands moved continuously. Immediately, endless cold air rolled from his hands. What was strange was that although it was extremely cold, it didn't freeze the seawater around. It showed that his understanding of ice power Upanishad had reached the peak. Boom! Emperor Sea Shark took action one more time. Chapter 3057. Yi Shiwen didn't want to be outdone. His aura was released to the extreme. The terrifying power of the peak of Fourth Realm burst out completely. 6 paths of reincarnation fist. Yi Shiwen took one step forward. He was like a human-shaped dragon, pouncing forward and clashing with Emperor Sea Shark. Boom! 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 The shock waves from their fight almost flattened the entire graveyard of the sky-devouring ominous Python clan. It was extremely terrifying. The two of them clashed again and again. No one knew how many times they had exchanged blows. Every time they exchanged blows, the earth and sky would tremble. Emperor Sea Shark was stronger than Emperor Yu. Facing Yi Shiwen's attacks, he didn't seem to be in a disadvantageous position. However, to Emperor Sea Shark, it was already unimaginable. In the same realm, he was in a disadvantageous position. Although he wasn't in a disadvantageous position, it was already unbelievable to him. It should be known that the creatures in the outer domain were mostly natural-born ferocious creatures. Compared to the cultivators of the Fortune God dynasty, although their understanding of principle wasn't as deep, their physical combat strength was one level higher. Moreover, the divine tools they refined with their bodies could even compete with the Tao tools refined by Emperor Realm experts using super-divine materials from heaven and earth. From this, one could see how terrifying these creatures were. However, this human in front of him could resist his physical body and even gain the upper hand. This completely subverted his worldview. Facing such a battle, the more Yi Shiwen fought, the more excited he became. His gilded tyrant form hadn't made a breakthrough for a long time. It was only strengthened as his cultivation increased, but it didn't advance by leaps and bounds. Although it was strong, it wasn't enough for Yi Shiwen. Even so, he didn't have a solution because he couldn't find a worthy opponent. However, he now found that the bodies of these creatures from the outer domain were extremely strong. Perhaps if this continued, his gilded tyrant form would be able to break through the shackles and enter a whole new level. For a cultivator, the physical body was like a boat. How far one could go and how strong one's physical body was crucial. If he wanted to improve further in the future, and even aspire to the legendary Celestial Master Realm, his physical body cultivation must improve further. Now that he saw hope, how could he not be excited? Even with his state of mind of an imperial emperor, he couldn't help but be excited in the face of such a possibility. It was just a possibility. Even if it could become a reality, he would have to spend a lot of effort to deduce it. However, it was enough to have such a possibility. Yi Shiwen seemed to understand something. The spiritual power in his body moved faster and faster, and the battle became fiercer. At first, Emperor Sea Shark thought that he was just in a disadvantageous position. However, shortly after, he felt a tremendous pressure. Yi Shiwen's fighting competence was like a spark ignited by someone. He rocketed up in just a blink of an eye. In just a blink of an eye, Emperor Sea Shark was subdued. Under Yi Shiwen's attacks, Emperor Sea Shark had to back off continuously. When Yi Shiwen punched him away, he had smashed through the sea water and turned it into ashes. On the other side, when Emperor Yu saw that the two of them had started fighting, he immediately had another idea. He took a big step forward and formed a huge hand to grab the corpse of the golden sky-devouring ominous python patriarch. Now that the two of them were fighting, neither of them had the time to care about him. Feather Emperor, don't even think about it. At this time, the cauldron above Dendi Emperor's head grew bigger. In a flash, it seemed to swallow the entire world. Boom! The giant hand hit the cauldron directly, creating an earth-shaking explosion. However, it couldn't smash the cauldron completely. Dendi Emperor, you think you can stop me? Feather Emperor was enraged. First, he had Yi Shiwen as his roommate. Then, Emperor Sea Shark appeared. And now, Dendi, who he didn't put in his eyes, dared to stop him. Feather Emperor's feather robe fluttered. He flew out instantly, pressing down on Dendi Emperor. Boom! The two peerless emperors collided in just a blink of an eye. Feather Emperor wanted to snatch the phaseless spirit bone before Yi Shiwen could do it. He was desperate. The final result was that both sides would get hurt and no one would get it. However, Emperor Sea Shark had come to stir things up, which gave him a new chance to burn the phaseless spirit bone. This time, he would never give up. Instantly, the entire graveyard of the sky-devouring ominous python clan had become two battlefields. The four experts at the Emperor Sea Shark's level had started their battle, which almost shattered the entire space. If this place didn't have the Emperor-level sky-devouring ominous python's corpse, which strengthened the space many times, this place would have collapsed already. However, under the fierce energy fluctuations, the space was still like a piece of paper. It shook hard as if it could shatter at any minute. Yi Shiwen had just broken through to the peak of the fourth realm in a short period of time. Compared with the initial stage of the fourth realm, there was an earth-shaking change. Even Yi Shiwen hadn't been able to fully grasp this change. Now that he was fighting against a super master of the same realm, he was gradually forcing out this change. Yi Shiwen had pushed Emperor Sea Shark into a disadvantageous position. Yi Shiwen's series of attacks made him unable to lift his head. It was the first time he was subdued like that in a battle at the same realm. The martial Emperor's seal above Yi Shiwen's head spun, pressing down on Emperor Sea Shark. Surprisingly, the martial Emperor's seal created another Yi Shiwen, suppressing everywhere. And now Yi Shiwen's real body directly dashed toward Emperor Sea Shark. He wanted to fight against two Emperor Sea Shark at the same time. Yi Shiwen's sudden attack startled Emperor Sea Shark, who was fighting against Dan Emperor. He felt a strong sense of danger. He turned around and saw Yi Shiwen holding the Taijue sword. In just one step, Yi Shiwen had crossed the space and slashed at him. Emperor Sea Shark was so scared that his hair stood on end. Damn it! Emperor Sea Shark can't even stop him! Emperor Sea Shark roared indignantly. However, Emperor Sea Shark couldn't care about him anymore. Yi Shiwen's martial Emperor Seal had even created a tool spirit to subdue him. He didn't have time to care about the others. How could he be so fierce? Emperor Sea Shark screamed indignantly in his head. He could fight one against two. It wasn't just suppressing low-realm Emperor Sea Shark. Even if he was suppressing Dan Emperor, the two of them were enough to give him a headache. And now Yi Shiwen was trying to subdue the two of them. Emperor Sea Shark was enraged and frightened at the same time. Yi Shiwen was too domineering. Countless feathers flew out of the Feather Emperor's body and condensed into a real body. Then, it rushed towards Yi Shiwen and blocked his path forward. Swoosh! Before the true feather body could play its role, a ray of sword light swept into the true feather body and exploded on the spot. This true body was enough to stop a fourth realm expert. However, it couldn't even stop Yi Shiwen's attack. The difference between them was too big. Emperor Sea Shark shivered. He attacked again, forcing Dan Emperor to back off. Then, he dashed toward Yi Shiwen. At this moment, he didn't have any other option. Yi Shiwen was coming aggressively. He was more than enough to deal with Dan Emperor. However, facing Yi Shiwen at the same time, it wasn't enough. Heaven's Emergence Great Tao. The Feather Emperor let out a loud roar as he unleashed a supreme divine ability. In an instant, the natural laws of heaven and earth changed color, as if they were undergoing a transformation, transforming into something of a higher level. In the blink of an eye, everything shattered. The Heaven's Emergence Great Tao seemed to be turning into a scripture. It contained the supreme Great Tao. It was an extremely impressive technique and scripture. This Heaven's Emergence Great Tao shouldn't be ordinary. Yi Shiwen's expression froze slightly. He could immediately tell that the Heaven's Emergence Great Way contained many things that even surpassed the way of the Emperor. The fact that the Yu Emperor was able to achieve Tao through this was indeed extraordinary. It even surpassed many of the great ways that Yi Shiwen had previously known. However, no matter how powerful a great Tao was, it depended on who was using it. For Yi Shiwen, it was enough as long as he was strong enough to defeat everything. Boom! The Tai Yu sword in Yi Shiwen's hand erupted with waves of law light. In an instant, the Heaven's Emergence Great Tao that was about to turn into a scripture exploded on the spot. However, in the next instant, Yi Shiwen's sword light had already penetrated the scripture and slashed toward Emperor Sea Shark. Damn it, how can he be so strong? Emperor Sea Shark used an amazing technique and barely escaped from Yi Shiwen's sword light. He moved hundreds of miles away in an instant. His heart was still trembling in fear. Yi Shiwen's movements were too fast. Compared to before, he didn't know how much faster he was. However, this was just the beginning. In the next instant, Yi Shiwen appeared almost at the same time as him. He slashed down with his sword again. The sword will of the ruler's sword spread out in all directions. In an instant, it was about to dominate the world and become the only ruler between heaven and earth. This sword will was extremely terrifying and overbearing. In an instant, it dominated the world. The terrifying pressure crushed down on him. In fact, he felt suffocated. He felt like he was about to spit out blood. Whatever. I'll go all out. I don't believe that you can really fight against two people at the same time. Emperor Sea Shark roared again and again. The light from his feather clothes illuminated the entire sea. The ultimate Emperor Dao aura spread into the sky. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.